Chapter 84. From then on, the news that He family's second young master wanted to marry Hellion Vivian spread throughout the entire White Academy in just one day's time. It was said that after Old Man He heard that He family's second young master had this kind of idea, he was so angry that he almost drove his most beloved grandson out of the family. How could the dignified He family's descendant marry a notorious good-for-nothing? This was simply a joke. Your Highness, you don't know, but this academy has started to stir up trouble. While Eunuch's son talked about the gossip he heard, he shook his head. You tell me, what kind of ability does that Hellion family's young lady have in the end? She's so dark and swarthy, why would young Master Zhe take a fancy to her? Pa! The black chess piece fell on the chessboard with a crisp sound. Beligaju flicked his sleeves and stood up. His tall and straight back was as straight as a pine tree in Song Mountain. His indifference made people feel no warmth at all. Eunuch's son was dumbstruck. His hand that was pouring tea froze in midair. Just now His Highness was angry? Why? Eunuch's son started to recall what he did wrong again. Could it be that it was because he took the superior compound's invitation without permission? That's not right. His Highness clearly also agreed to go. Then what else was there? Eunuch's son racked his brains but still couldn't figure out the problem. Nangong Lai, who was nestled outside the academy, laughed evilly. Someone actually didn't open their eyes and touch the pet he's recently been interested in. I really want to end this quickly and go back to see what he'll do. Senior priest, who are you talking about? The minister looked puzzledly at the genius priest who was in the middle of a divination and slightly raised his eyebrows. Can it be that if we find him, we can solve this drought? Nangong Lai heavily coughed twice. Only now did he remember that he was still in the middle of a divine prophecy. He waved his hand and continued to chant. In the inferior compound's ancestral hall, Hellion Vivian was as usual. As usual, she was lying on the wooden table and fiddling with those armament components. The surrounding students all used pensive gazes to look at her, whispering and pointing. Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows and lifted her gaze. Only then did those people quickly stop talking. They also didn't know why, but when they met this good-for-nothing's gaze, they would subconsciously feel afraid. Hellion Vivian didn't have any other intentions. She just wanted to know what was going on with this group of people. They were unusually excited today. But before she could ask, someone came in from outside and said that the third prince wanted to use a handkerchief. The one that had been blown away by the wind should have been washed. Hellion Vivian understood that people with mysophobia had a sense of ownership over their personal belongings. Therefore, this time Hellion Vivian didn't sell the handkerchief. After earnestly washing it, she took the handkerchief and followed an ing to the superior compound. The winter bamboos were faint, the green orioles were chirping, and the fog was rising. Under the arch bridge carved from white jade, there was a pool of spring water. In this kind of weather, not only did it not emit any coldness, it was actually hot. Needless to say, there should be some kind of spring nearby. As expected, the third prince was a person who knew how to enjoy life. His Highness just entered the palace to accompany the retired emperor and drank a bit of wine. Right now he's still resting inside. Miss Hellion should eat some pastries first. I'll go report right away. An ing placed Hellion Vivian on a carved sandalwood chair in the outer room. Next to the chair was a small wooden table. On the wooden table were all kinds of pastries and nuts. The arrangement was very delicate and pleasing, yet there was no sign that anyone had touched them. Next to the fruit platter was a purple clay teapot. The handle of the teapot was carved with a lotus. The workmanship was very particular. Under the teapot was a small heater. The fire in the heater wasn't very big, just enough to keep the temperature of the water hot. Hellion Vivian just happened to be hungry. She also didn't hold back and picked up the pastries to eat. She could even faintly hear the sound of movement inside. Let her in. That voice seemed to carry its own reverberation. Even the tone of voice was hoarse and deep, extremely sexy. Yes, Your Highness. An ing brought Hellion Vivian inside. Separated by a faintly discernible sand curtain, he outlined a clear and cold line. Come here. Beligaju seemed to be sitting on the ground. He was wearing an ancient black nightgown. Half of his clothes were open, and half of his long black curly hair hung down, messily draped on both sides of his head. This was the scene that Hellion Vivian saw when she walked in. The high and mighty third prince was really sitting on the brown floor. His back was leaning against the wooden bed. His 2 long legs were casually bent, and his arms were resting on his knees. Even if it was a somewhat powerful posture, it still carried a bit of casual elegance when done by him. After hearing the sound, he glanced in her direction. There was a hint of alcohol in his long and narrow phoenix eyes. His thin lips opened and closed, as if he was chewing something. From the corner of his eyes, he caught a glimpse of Hellion Vivian's puzzled expression. Beligaju casually took out a piece of unopened candied melon from his robe and threw it to her. His tone was indifferent as he said, "Eat." So he was eating candied melon. But Hellion Vivian looked at the thing in her palm, and then looked at the man who was tugging at his collar. She was very sure that the royal prince was most likely drunk. Otherwise, as cold and aloof as him, he would never throw the snacks that he carried with him to share with others. Bailey Jiaju saw that she didn't eat the food he gave her. His apathetic and tranquil line of sight slowly swept over her face, as if he was trying to identify her for a moment. Then he said in a completely unrelated manner, "Don't call me your highness." After a pause, he said with a trace of displeasure in his deep voice, "Everyone calls me that. Did you guys discuss it?" Hellion Vivian. He was really drunk. His highness when drunk was a little too cute. Hellion Vivian looked at him with bad intentions. "I'll help you up first." In a while, when there was no one around, she could take off the silver mask on his face and take a good look at what he looked like. Unexpectedly, Beligaju indifferently brushed her aside. He touched his forehead, and there was a strong sense of vigilance between his eyebrows. "Go and get some water." His voice had a slight hoarseness, like the timbre that flowed out of an expensive cello, with an elegant and deep texture. As expected of the third prince, even if he was drunk, he would not be manipulated by anyone. Even the aura of a superior that he was born with was becoming more and more obvious. He would definitely not be careless when ordering people around. Pouring a cup of water was just a matter of convenience. Hellion Vivian took the cup and bent down to pass it to him. Beligaju did not take it, but just lowered his forehead with his fist. His long eyebrows were tightly knitted. His dark phoenix eyes were originally filled with a deathly stillness, but under her gaze, there was a hint of evilness. He looked at her with faint curiosity. "Who are you? Why are you so obedient?" Hellion Vivian. She had been so busy, but he still didn't know who she was. Should she say that the third prince was too noble and forgetful, or should she say that he drank too much and lost consciousness? No matter what, the handkerchief had been given and the water had been poured. It was time for her to leave. But she did not expect that when Hellion Vivian wanted to get up, her wrist was caught in his palm. Chapter 85. To the third prince it wasn't a big deal. It was just a matter of adding an affair. She didn't want to be kicked out of the academy because of this kind of bullshit. Quickly pushing him away, Hellion Vivian stood up from the floor and looked at Beligaju with a slightly cold gaze. What? Could it be that this highness said something wrong? Beligaju's voice had a faint smile that couldn't be ignored. Hellion Vivian just realized that when he was drunk, he wasn't just a little bit more evil than before. However, after taking advantage of her, he still disdained her for being weak? He really thought that she, Hellion Vivian, was a vegetarian. If it wasn't because this body's physical strength was too weak, does your highness think that I wouldn't be able to beat you? Hellion Vivian grabbed Beligaju's collar. Her small face was lowered and her voice was fierce. Calling her a hedonist really wasn't excessive at all. Beligaju clearly didn't like the words she used. His long eyebrows faintly wrinkled. This little fox's mouth was really only suitable for kissing. He rubbed his forehead with a headache and said in a cold voice, "Don't worry, I'll take responsibility." What she was discussing with him wasn't the problem of taking responsibility or not, okay? Moreover, even if she really got married, she wouldn't marry someone who turned into a wolf after getting drunk. Who said that you'll take responsibility? Hellion Vivian coldly threw away the outer garment that was messed up by him. This way she would appear more dignified. Just now the outer garment was messed up by him. Anyone with a discerning eye would know what happened with one look. Beligaju only thought that she was throwing a tantrum. Regardless of whether a woman was smart or not, Once they had a temper, they wouldn't be rational enough. They had already kissed. Other than making him take responsibility, did she have a better way out? Even the He clan was properly dealt with by him after a round of drinking. Why was this woman still angry at him for something so obvious? Someone as noble as Third Prince simply didn't understand. From Wei Wei's point of view, being kissed by someone didn't necessarily mean that the other party had to take responsibility. Even though in the truest sense, her first kiss had been snatched away. Wei Wei's heart was also angry, but she wasn't a girl from ancient times. Reputation compared to her simply didn't count for anything. Besides, if a man likes a woman, then the first characteristic of a man should be respect for her. It was obvious that the Third Prince was more interested in her. Not to mention that he had drunk wine. If it wasn't for the fact that the timing wasn't right, she would have had the urge to cripple his hands. Your Highness. When Eunuch Sun came in, he saw this scene. The two of them, one standing with fire in his eyes, the other sitting in a cold and noble manner. The way they looked at each other was a little strange. Beligaju faintly hummed, as if he was still being tortured by the alcohol. His nasal voice was a little heavy. Eunuch Sun exclaimed, Your Highness, why are you drinking? Don't you know that your body can't drink? Did you do something to provoke the retired emperor again? Eunuch Sun's guess was correct. Bailey Jiaju had indeed provoked retired emperor. It was only because Bailey Jiaju had raised a request that made retired emperor very angry, that retired emperor, in a fit of anger, made retired emperor's imperial grandson, who he clearly knew couldn't drunk until he collapsed. Miss Wei Wei. Eunuch Sun carefully looked at Hellion Vivian's expression. He leaned over and whispered, His Highness didn't do anything to you? After he drinks, he'll always be very strange. For example, he would wickedly ask people to get out and then get in again. In short, he wasn't like his usual master at all. Hellion Vivian chuckled twice in her heart. Sure enough, it was because he was drunk. Eunuch Sun, if the royal family gets drunk again, you can finally find a man. Maybe he'll be happy and reward you with some gold, silver and jewels. Eunuch Sun didn't understand this time. Find a man for what? His Highness only liked to make people roll around. This had never been differentiated between men and women. Because the Third Prince Hellion Vivian raised her thin lips. Each word was like a ruffian, needs to be suppressed. After throwing down these two words, Hellion Vivian left. Missing her first kiss and losing her outer garment, she looked more ruthless than ever. The queen's aura that had been restrained by her all year round was inadvertently exposed in that instant. When Eunuch Sun heard the two words needs to be suppressed, his mouth opened wide. By the time he reacted, Hellion Vivian had already walked far away. He turned his head to look at his master. That person acted as if nothing had happened. He stood up from the floor, absent-mindedly arranged his collar, and stood by the window. He was aloof and indolent. His thin lips seemed to be broken, but it didn't diminish his elegance at all. On the contrary, it added a touch of seductive evil charm. Eunuch Sun couldn't help but wonder what his master did in the end to make that Hellion family's eldest daughter give him the two words, needs to be suppressed. What was even stranger was that His Highness actually didn't get angry. Although His Highness' temper was better after drinking wine, that didn't mean that he didn't have a temper. What was going on today? Eunuch Sun blinked his eyes. Immediately after, he seemed to have thought of something and shouted loudly, Your Highness, your mouth. Someone come, all of you come in. How are you all looking after His Highness? Eunuch Sun's voice grew louder and louder. Beligaju only stood there indifferently, allowing the person beside him to serve him. When his slender finger brushed across his thin lips, it brought out a smile that had never been seen before. Eunuch Sun was still pondering how his master had provoked the retired emperor, to actually let the retired emperor bear to force him to drink so much wine, to the point that his master had bitten his lip until it bled. He would never have thought that this lip wasn't bitten by Beligaju, but rather by Hellion Vivian. That was because in Eunuch Sun's memories, his master had never even looked at a girl, let alone taking the initiative to kiss someone. Even if it was really his master who kissed someone, that girl would also be wild with joy and absolutely wouldn't come up and bite His Highness. Therefore, Eunuch Sun had already guessed that the wound on Beligaju's lip was bitten by himself. It also couldn't be blamed that Eunuch Sun didn't think of Hellion Vivian. It was only because Beligaju's popularity in the Dragon War Empire was too great. Practically all of the noble young ladies wouldn't refuse this godlike existence of a man. Dusk, west side of the academy. Hellion Vivian played with the armament component in her hand, and suddenly heavily wiped the corner of her lower lip. This made Ji Zun, who was sitting at the side, raise his eyebrows in astonishment. This was the first time he saw this girl so impetuous. As if she was aware of her own impetuousness, Hellion Vivian heavily closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were full of clarity. "Master, what did you just say? Can you say it again?" Ji Zun heavily coughed twice. "Master received news from the palace today. The consort selection is estimated to be brought forward. Originally, the retired emperor wanted to see the results after the martial chi competition, but now the palace is a bit busy. In addition, he also has a satisfactory candidate in his heart, which is your younger sister. In the evening, he will come to White Academy to confirm his future granddaughter-in-law. You are also a selected beauty, so you still have to go eat a banquet." Chapter 86. Okay. Hellion Vivian casually shrugged her shoulders. In any case, eating one meal is eating 2 meals is also eating. It's only a formality. The earlier it ends, the more she can concentrate on preparing for the martial chi test. Ji Zun didn't know what she was thinking. After looking at Hellion Vivian for a while, he loudly stood up. "Disciple, you can rest assured. Even if the third prince doesn't choose you, there are still other young masters at the banquet. If it really doesn't work, then the He family's kid is also fine. I'm not interested in getting married right now." Hellion Vivian laughed. Pushing the parts in her hands, a first-rate armament was made. This armament was clearly different from other armaments. It was made of a completely black material. When it was formed, it was only the size of a palm. However, when it was fully unfolded, it was a scythe that only the Grim Reaper in comics would carry. It was extremely cool and handsome. The blade also revealed a cold elegance, as if it was looking down on all living things. Life and death, it was completely demonic. Seeing that armament, Ji Zun's eyes lit up. "Wings of the Night God. Disciple, how much do you intend to sell this armament for? Master will give you a higher price. How about you sell it to Master?" Hellion Vivian was also very satisfied with what she made. She casually put it on her shoulder and smiled. "Master, this one won't do. It's a gift. As for the rest, Master can choose whichever one you like." "Okay." Ji Zun's expression clearly carried a trace of disappointment. However, there was no use for the Wings of the Night God by his side. He was already old, and simply couldn't control such a destructive armament. Rather than letting such a good treasure stay in the shop and get stained with dust, he might as well put it into the hands of a suitable person. Only he didn't know why, but when he first saw this armament, the first thing he thought of was actually that icy brat who was currently choosing a concubine. Speaking of which, he also didn't know who exactly that red Luan of his was. These past few days, he observed the stars every day and night, but he still couldn't guess the reason why. "Master, I'm leaving." Hellion Weiwei's finger moved to the side. That sickle seemed to have been triggered by some mechanism and quickly closed together, lying quietly in the palm of her hand. Ji Zun looked at her cold back and shook his head again. If only his disciple could grow a little whiter. If she grew a little whiter, even if that ice brat was unwilling, he would still send his obedient disciple to the palace. But now sigh. The Grandmaster heaved a long sigh. He only hoped that his dear disciple would not be maliciously belittled by those people at tonight's banquet. Before nightfall, the academy was bustling with noise. In order to welcome the arrival of the retired emperor, lanterns were hung everywhere. Even the commerce courtyard was bustling with activity. Previously, Minister Jing had already been thrown into the heavenly prison. With the return of Headmaster Tu Sufeng, the entire banquet was filled with a strong academic atmosphere. It was obvious that the latter was much more elegant than the former. Hellion Vivian wasn't in a hurry to go to the banquet. As usual, she didn't dress up and asked her little brother to come out. With a lazy expression, she stood under a locust tree and yawned. When Beligaju, who had returned to his student attire, appeared, he saw this scene. After confirming that there was no smell of alcohol on his body, He walked over and said in an indifferent tone, "What's the matter that's so urgent? Anne? You've come?" For a moment, Helene Vivian felt that this man's voice was too familiar. It was so familiar that she couldn't remember where she had heard it before. Bailey Jiaju hummed in agreement. The demonically cold light in his eyes fell on her thin lips. This made Helene Vivian recall the kiss that happened this evening at the third prince's place. She clearly knew that this matter wouldn't be known by anyone, but Helene Vivian inexplicably felt somewhat guilty. She avoided his gaze, took out a black bracelet from her bag, and threw it to him. "Try it. It's the armament I promised to make for you." When Beligaju saw that armament, his eyes faintly flashed with a ray of light. Only that ray of light was hidden too deep, so deep that only he knew. "Such a small thing, do I have to buckle it on my wrist?" The man pretended to be puzzled as he asked. Helene Vivian smiled, pressed the small button on its left side. Beligaju cooperated and did as he was told. A black sickle as tall as a person appeared in the boundless moonlight. "This is..." Beligaju raised his eyebrows. Helene Vivian curved her thin lips. "Wings of the night god. The first time I saw you I wanted to make this kind of sickle. Don't look at how this armament isn't made of silver. Its material isn't bad at all. Xiaobai dug up some tungsten iron from the spirit forest for me. I heard that it has more soul-sucking power than silver. You really want to give it to me?" Beligaju's voice faintly interrupted her words. Helene Vivian raised her beautiful phoenix eyes. "What? You don't like it?" "No, I like it very much." The man's deep eyes motionlessly looked at her. Suddenly, he raised his arm and lifted her bangs. Then, he leaned over and pressed his thin lips on her forehead. The corners of his mouth carried an evil aura. "Thank you for the gift." Helene Vivian touched her forehead and pushed him away. "What are you doing? Don't you know the Academy's rules?" Last time, he was in the limelight in the ancestral hall, but he didn't do anything substantial. This time he played a bit too big. Bailey Jiaju lazily curved his lips. He put away the scythe and looped it around his wrist. "I've already said that I'm thanking you for your reward. Or is it that Sir Patron prefers a deeper feeling? For example, beating you up?" Helene Vivian also laughed. Her left hand rotated her wrist, looking like a demon. Beligaju reached out and wrapped her fist. He opened his thin lips as if he wanted to say something. At this time, a burst of laughter suddenly came from the distance. "What did I say? Some people are used to being debauched and can't live without a man." It was Helene May. Following behind her were young ladies from prestigious families who were about to attend the banquet. All of them had dressed up meticulously, especially Helene Jiao Air. She wore a pure white long skirt embroidered with gold and silver velvet flowers. On the outside she wore a light pink outer garment. In between her eyebrows there was an exquisite hibiscus flower, adding a trace of a girl's delicate and shy beauty. "Don't worry about her. She's only worthy of finding someone from the inferior compound. Little sister Nye is right. Let's not worry about her. Let's talk about something happy. Did you hear? There's news from the palace. It's said that this time the retired emperor is not only coming to pick a consort for the royal family, but also to hold a flower appreciation festival. Every family's young master will participate. Whoever they like will be given the white cherry blossoms in their hands. A certain person will be miserable. When the time comes, they won't be able to receive a single one. That's not enough to lose face." The ridicule grew more and more. There were even people who didn't hide their laughter and said, "Then wouldn't there be a good play to watch tonight?" I still remember last year's Flower Appreciation Festival. A certain person gave us a unique joke, hee. Chapter 87. If they didn't mention it, Helene Vivian would have almost forgotten what she had encountered at the Flower Appreciation Festival. In the Dragon War Empire, the annual Flower Appreciation Festival was the most anticipated festival for young girls. Because on this day, all the young masters from influential families would hold a white cherry blossom and give it to the young girl they admired. At that time, Helene Vivian had just reached marriageable age and had the fantasies that all young girls would have. She hoped that her future husband would give her a white cherry blossom. In order to be more beautiful on that day, she even threw away her self-esteem and took the initiative to ask for money from Madame Su. She still remembered the sarcastic remarks of those people around Madame Su. They said, "No matter how well you dress, you're still just a poor and pedantic person." Hellion Vivian clenched her hands. She had no choice but to swallow the anger in her heart. No matter how hedonistic the rumors made her out to be in the capital, only she knew that she had to look at other people's faces in the manner. She was afraid that Murong Changfeng would forget to bring a white cherry blossom, so she called out the servant by his side and asked him to deliver a letter to her. Who knew that not only did the servant not deliver it, he even ordered someone to read the letter out loud. All the young masters and young ladies from influential families who attended the Flower Appreciation Festival all knew the contents of the letter. The originally bashful young girl's thoughts were exposed in front of everyone's eyes. The men looked at her with disrespect and licentiousness in their eyes. The young girls held their fans and laughed together. She still remembered Hellion Jiaoer's smiling eyes at that time. She curved her red lips and said to her, "Eldest sister, you must not bear grudges against Lord Murong." He also didn't think that he would attract so many people to watch. At that time she was young and couldn't think straight. It was obvious that someone had tampered with it, causing her reputation to be tarnished. And at that time Murong Changfeng didn't say anything. He only stood there and coldly smiled. It was as if he felt disgusted just by looking at her. Hellion Vivian just stood there and watched everything in a daze. Everyone roared with laughter and mocked her as if they were looking at a clown. But at that time, it was as if her eyes only had the letter pasted on the wall and the white cherry blossom on the ground. That day, she was the only girl who didn't receive a single white cherry blossom. Even Miss May, who was 3 times fatter than her, had a gentleman give her one. She, on the other hand, was being patronized. However, that family's young master actually said to her, "Tisk tsk, I really didn't expect you to be so unrestrained. Do you want to follow this big brother, Hellion Vivian was furious. She threw the white cherry blossom at his face and ran out of the banquet. She could faintly hear that person's voice. "It is your fortune that I fancy you. You are not willing. What are you? You are just a sex slave. How dare you be so picky?" They were all saying that she was a spoiled brat with no upbringing. She even hit people in such an occasion. She's simply bringing shame to us women. But he didn't ask her why she hit him. Even Murong Changfeng, upon seeing the tear stains on her face, turned his eyes away as if it had nothing to do with him, as if she had nothing to do with him. It turned out that this group of people also did this kind of thing to her. Hellion Weiwei withdrew from her memories and set her sight on Hellion Jiaoer's body. The light in her eyes chilled. She didn't know why, but the current Hellion Jiaoer was actually a little afraid of this good-for-nothing smile from time to time. She evaded her gaze and her soft shoulders shrunk back, as if she was attacked and wanted to seek help. Miss Nya, who was standing by her side, naturally put her arm around her shoulder. "Sister Jiaoer, don't be afraid. With us here, this person can't harm you." "That's right." Everyone echoed one after another. "Sister Jiaoer, in a moment the retired emperor will arrive. You should concentrate on the banquet. The imperial family will certainly give you a white cherry blossom. As for the others, it's better if we don't see them and don't worry about them." Hellion Jiaoer made a small sound of agreement and smiled gently. Her long skirt swayed as she arrogantly glanced at Hellion Vivian. Like the moon surrounded by stars, she walked towards the superior compound. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips, tainted with a faint evil aura. She turned her head towards Beligaju and said, "Take the things properly. If you don't like them, come find me at any time to make adjustments. I should also go freeload on food and drink. Bye." The dusk grew thicker and a cool breeze brushed past. Beligaju looked at that slender and free figure. His eyes slightly sunk. Freeload on food and drink. At his consort selection banquet, the only thing she thought of was to freeload on food and drink? "Master, just now, that woman gave you an armament." As early as when Hellion Vivian gave the item to Beligaju, the Fire Qilin seemed to have felt something and immediately used the conveyor belt to transport himself over from Spirit Forest. However, he was hidden in the darkness and didn't say anything. Beligaju knew what he wanted to say. His tone was indifferent. Attack power level 10 or above, soul-absorbing power as high as 100%. "I'm afraid it would be difficult to find a second one in this world." The Fire Qilin's mouth twitched twice. Since you already know, why were you still pretending? What thanking his patron for his reward? His entire beast body was charred on the outside and tender on the inside. In a moment I'm going to choose a consort. You don't need to follow. It'll be troublesome if someone sees you. Bailey Jiaju hurriedly issued the order. He took 2 steps forward and said in a low voice, Shadow, this subordinate is here. Shadow flashed and respectfully knelt on the ground. Baligaju's voice was indifferent. What happened at last year's flower appreciation banquet? Ah, Shadow was stunned. Didn't His Highness never care about this kind of thing? Every year at the flower appreciation banquet, he would sleep through it. Don't even talk about giving people white cherry blossoms. When he arrived at the banquet, he would sit high and mighty on the chaise lounge, not even bothering to open his eyes. He wasn't like the high priest who liked to run into the crowd to join in on the fun. However, since Baligaju asked, he still dutifully told him what he had seen and heard. It was inevitable that he would mention Hellion Vivian. The more Baligaju listened, the colder his eyes became. Unfortunately, the fire Chelan still recklessly sighed from the side. No wonder that woman would reject Master in the spirit forest. It turns out that she already had someone in her heart. Sounds like she's really infatuated. Baligaju's footsteps paused. He looked back at the fire Chelan deeply. The smile at the corner of his mouth was extremely cold. The fire Chelan felt the top of its head go numb. It dejectedly dodged and immediately threw out the teleportation belt, disappearing into the thick fog. It had a kind of misconception that if it stayed any longer, its master would not be able to hold back and personally roast it, eating it like a roasted Chelan. It was night, and the willows were caressing their faces. On the 5th day of the 4th lunar month, the Grand White Lake could be said to be filled with fragrance. The noble ladies of each family were dressed even more exquisitely than in previous years. The ladies sat on the ground, sipping tea and admiring the flowers. Where was the vigor they had when they were mocking Hellion Vivian? All of them were much more demure and gentle. They held round fans in their hands. From time to time, they would glance at the group of noble young masters in the pavilion. Their faces were flushed red. Chapter 88. The most eye-catching were naturally the Hellion Jiaoers group. The Nye family's young miss, Hellion Mei, and the others just now were all girls envied by everyone in the capital. Not only were their martial chi more powerful than others, even their appearances were top-notch. Each of them had more or less white cherry blossoms behind them. The white cherry blossoms behind the Hellion Jiaoer were pushed into a pile. Carefully counting, there were more than a dozen blossoms. She didn't look at them the entire time. Instead, she fanned herself with a gentle smile, without the slightest intention of picking them up. Everyone was waiting for the white cherry blossoms in the hands of those noble young masters to go, especially the one in Baligaju's hands. Although the royal family would attend the Flower Appreciation Festival every year, he had never shown his face, let alone give the white cherry blossoms to anyone. This time was different. Since he came, it meant that there was already a girl to give the white cherry blossoms to. But everyone carefully thought about it again. Even if the royal family were to give it, it would be to the Hellion Jiaoer. They didn't have any hope, so they used words to make the Hellion Jiaoer laugh. The Hellion Jiaoer once again raised her head and glanced at that handsome and noble man. Her eyelashes slightly drooped, and she tenderly said, so loud, be careful that no one comes. Oh, so Sister Jiaoer was afraid that no one would come. The Nye family's young miss ambiguously touched her, using the fan to cover the corner of her mouth. Did you hear that? Sister Jiaoer told you to be a bit quieter. What will you do if the royal family doesn't come? The Hellion Jiaoer's face reddened. You're the only one who thinks too much. Sister Jiaoer, no matter how much I think, I can't compare to a certain someone. The Nye family's young miss pointedly glanced at the nearby Hellion Vivian from the corner of her eyes. Her eyes carried ridicule. She's been eating since just now. Don't tell me that she wants to use this method to attract His Highness's attention again like last time. The rare Hellion Jiaoer didn't answer. Instead, she took the teacup and took a sip. Her eyes were filled with a poisonous look that no one could see through. Hellion Vivian didn't eat all the time. She played with the armament components in her hands, thinking about opening a second branch. But she didn't expect that Murong Chongfeng would walk towards her with a letter in his hand. Hellion Vivian looked up indifferently. Murong Chongfeng was wearing an embroidered jade gown, with black eyes and black hair, as if he had given her a great grace. His voice was neither warm nor hot as he opened his mouth. "I've seen the letter, as expected." "What do you mean, as expected?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows in amusement. This person must be crazy. The two people, one with her eyes down and the other with her head up, unexpectedly had some lingering flavor from afar. Standing in the pavilion, Beligaju's hand that was holding the teacup paused. His pair of eyes seemed to be bottomless abyss. Not a single strand of abstinence was displayed vividly on his body. His body had a kind of languid and decadent cold temperament, like snow that had been covered in dust for a long time. All the young masters and young misses also saw this scene. Hellion May covered her face. Her eyebrows carried a smile. "Here she comes again. I wonder what she wrote in that letter this year. Who else could it be? It's nothing more than some thick-skinned words." The young misses held round fans and laughed softly. Among them there was no lack of ridicule. At this time the Hellion Jiaoer also stood up. She glanced at Beligaju, who wasn't far away, and softly said, "Don't say that. Big sister also sincerely likes Lord Murong. It's just that the method is a bit too bold." Beligaju was still sitting in the same place. The cold wind hit his body and his fingers were a bit cold. Eunuch's son, who had been waiting by his side, also began to nag. "Originally, I thought that the matter of the letter being given at the flower appreciation banquet was a false rumor. I didn't expect it to be true. This Hellion Vivian is really willing to do anything for Lord Murong. Perhaps Lord Murong will be moved and will really take back the letter of divorce." Beligaju didn't speak. He seemed to be indifferent. One of his hands loosened his collar, and the other hand lazily hung by his side. His eyes overflowed with a trace of coldness like splashed ink. It looked like he was smiling. But those who were familiar with him knew that he wasn't smiling. Instead, third brother? Little bald head seventh prince, who understood him, cutely raised his head from the pile of meat buns. What happened to third brother? Why was he suddenly so angry? He had only obediently eaten a meat bun because third brother said that if he continued to eat, he wouldn't be able to become a handsome man. He would only become a big fatty. Hellion Jiaoer also observed Beligaju's expression. Her eyes were half closed and a trace of deep satisfaction flashed through her eyes. After this incident, that slut's image in the eyes of the royal family definitely wouldn't have any. She knew better than anyone how much this man loathed women who didn't know how to behave, let alone take the initiative to send a letter at the flower appreciation banquet. Didn't that little slut always want to attract the attention of the royal family? Then she would let her get what she wanted. She wanted to see how that little slut would clean up this mess. "Lord Murong, are you really going to forgive this woman?" At this time, a rascally-looking young master walked over and looked ambiguously at Hellion Vivian. "She's even more licentious than you think. You don't know what happened last year. When she saw that you didn't give her any cherry blossoms, she directly stuck to this young master. This young master thought that she was ugly and said a few words to her. But she was good and threw a punch at me. She's so thick-skinned that she can be..." Bang! Before that person could finish speaking, Hellion Vivian had already made her move. She just stood there with a smile on her face and asked like a demon, "Does it hurt a lot?" "You." That person didn't expect her to be so bold. He covered his face and tried to stand up. Bang! Another fierce punch. Hellion Vivian's fingers grabbed his collar and her red phoenix eyes slightly raised. "Come, repeat what you just said. If you say anything wrong, my fist won't be happy." As if he was frightened by Hellion Vivian's aura, that person kept retreating, trying to escape her control. But his legs seemed to be filled with lead. He couldn't move no matter how hard he tried. What was going on? He couldn't use his own martial chi. Hellion Vivian was still smiling. "Say it, Bang! The third punch landed firmly on that person's abdomen. That person spat out a mouthful of blood and his face turned green. He was in so much pain that he shouted, someone come! Someone wants to kill me!" Hellion Vivian. Hellion May was the first to speak. But Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and intimidated her. "Hellion May, you shut up. I'm telling you, whoever stops me from beating this bastard, I'll drink their blood and take their life. Helian May's limbs suddenly stiffened. Here it comes again. She seemed to see the silver hair hanging behind that slut again. What was that? Was it a ghost? Say it. Helian Vivian leaned over and locked her fingers on that person's wrist. She smiled evilly and exerted force. Chapter 89. However, in an instant, that person's screams penetrated the entire academy. I'll talk. He was in so much pain that his face turned white, and his body went limp. That day you didn't stick close to me, it was. That person looked around, still hoping that someone could help him. But he underestimated Helian Vivian's ruthlessness. He even underestimated Beligaju's presence. The royal glanced over, and those who wanted to help could only obediently retreat. That person had no other choice and heavily closed his eyes. I wanted to take advantage of you, so you beat me. Hearing this, everyone was in an uproar. Looking at Helian Vivian, the light in their eyes was different from before. Even Murong Changfeng's eyes flashed with a trace of astonishment. He actually didn't know that the situation that day would be like this. Inexplicably, his heart softened. She had suffered so much because of him? Should he follow her wishes and give her a white cherry blossom? Murong Changfeng thought of this, and just as he opened his mouth to call, Vivian, Helian Vivian suddenly smiled and coldly interrupted him. Lord, the letter in your hand wasn't written by me. In the future, before you talk to people, you should first make sure who you're looking for. If there's nothing else, please move aside. You're really affecting my appetite by standing here. Every time she saw this scum's face, she felt disgusted. As Helian Vivian spoke, she pushed that person to the side, not even looking at Murong Changfeng's handsome face that instantly turned ashen. Helian Vivian, you wait for this young master. That person was battered and exhausted, spitting out ruthless words, step by step retreated. No matter how you looked at it, it was comical. Helian Jiaoer didn't think that her carefully arranged scheme would have such a result. She even specially had someone copy Helian Vivian's handwriting, but after being beaten by her, it didn't come in handy at all. Instead, that little bitch even clarified what happened last year. Helian Jiaoer clenched her teeth so hard that it hurt. She thought that no matter how Helian Vivian changed, her feelings for Murong Changfeng would never change. After all, no matter what happened in the past, as long as it involved Murong Changfeng, that little slut could endure it. But now, if it wasn't for the fact that her face was still the same as before, Helian Jiaoer would have suspected that Helian Vivian was a completely different person. This Helian family's young lady is really ruthless when she hits people. Eunuch's son patted his own chest. My heart is trembling along with her. Beligaju faintly hummed in acknowledgement. Looking at the ruthless and ruffian figure not far away, a trace of a smile seemed to flash across his eyes. Eunuch's son blinked. Was it his imagination? Why did he feel that his master's mood seemed to be better than before? Helian Vivian, don't regret it. On the other side, it seemed like a long time had passed before Murong Changfeng found his own voice. He fiercely waved his sleeves. Because of his excessive anger, his jawline was taut. That pair of deep eyes seemed to have been cut open, unexpectedly bringing out a sense of loss. He probably didn't expect that she really didn't like him anymore. He always thought that her behavior during this period of time was merely to play hard to get. But after listening to her words today, Murong Changfeng realized that she was mocking him. In the past, it was clear that wherever he went, that pair of eyes filled with adoration would follow. Now that it was gone, Murong Changfeng not only didn't relax like he imagined, but instead felt that there was a large stone pressing down on his chest, making it hard for him to breathe. Some of the aristocratic family's young misses who adored Murong Changfeng couldn't bear to watch anymore. They said sourly, "Who does she think she is? She's just a waste." Whether that letter was written by her or not, let's not talk about it. Lord also received the letter before walking over. Otherwise, Lord wouldn't even look at her. She's still so self-righteous, really enough. Who says she isn't? You see her appearance just now. She really lives up to the words hedonistic and vicious. You all just wait and see. There won't be any young master who will give her a white cherry blossom. Helian Vivian didn't feel like paying attention to these words. She sat in her original position and continued to eat, waiting for the retired emperor to start eating. Heizei looked at her appearance, his thin lips hooked up. What to do? It seemed that the more he looked at her, the more to his liking. Only that face. Heizei wrinkled his thick eyebrows. He still had to think about it. Alas, recently there were too many troublesome matters. He also didn't know who found him unpleasing to the eye and tipped off his old man. Now no matter where he went, he was being watched. Even if he wanted to give the white cherry blossom to that woman, he couldn't reach out his hand. As if he saw through Heizei's thoughts, the eyes of Bailey Jiaju, who was sitting beside him, deepened. Like a trace of ripples in a deep and serene ancient well, they quickly disappeared into the night. Just at this time, a burst of noise came from the courtyard. The retired emperor has arrived. The empress has arrived. A resounding voice cut through the sky. Hellion Vivian looked from afar and only saw a golden color. The retired emperor's cloak fluttered in the wind. He had the wisdom and grandeur that ordinary old people didn't have. He was in a high position all year round, making him look a lot taller. Even that face had sharp edges. It was enough to see that when he was young, he was also a first-class handsome man. Following behind him was the current Empress Murong Chongfeng's little aunt. It was said that when she entered the palace that year, the previous empress died. Only then was she promoted to the position of empress. Of course, no one knew what the exact situation was. However, Hellion Vivian felt that no one with the surname Murong was a good person. Don't ask her why, she just wanted to be capricious and judge people by their surname. Furthermore, this empress was not the third prince's birth mother. In short, the matters in the harem were extremely chaotic. Even if the palace maids were not allowed to discuss it, there would still be news that leaked out. Therefore, all of this was no longer a secret. Seeing them come in, everyone shouted, "Long live, long live, long live." The atmosphere of the flower-admiring banquet was instantly ignited. The retired emperor sat down with a chuckle and raised his hand in an amiable manner. "All rise. This is not the imperial palace, so there's no need to be overly courteous." Yes. The young ladies of the aristocratic families all responded delicately, standing obediently to the side. The retired emperor looked at this scene and nodded in satisfaction. Then, his gaze fell on that icy fellow who had an indifferent expression from beginning to end. He blew on his beard in anger. Tu Sufeng, who was standing beside him, naturally knew what the retired emperor was thinking. He gently and elegantly reminded from the side, "Look, shouldn't we let them continue to give flowers?" This official just took a look. Many of the young master's white cherry blossoms were not given out. "Continue, of course, continue." The retired emperor straightened his expression and said to Beligaju, "Lao San, you also choose one." In an instant, everyone's gaze focused on Beligaju. After all, every year, the imperial family had never given anyone a white cherry blossom. Now that the retired emperor had requested it, he had no choice but to give one out. In other words, this was the result of the imperial consort selection. As if she had anticipated that he would choose her, Hellion Jiao Air's pair of eyes were brimming with tears as her cheeks were stained with a light red color. Chapter 90. Hellion Vivian had an indifferent expression on her face. After all, the third prince would choose anyone but her. Hellion Vivian. Huh. Stand up. Phew, so she was in his way. She had thought that the third prince's brain was not working properly. Hellion Vivian was very self-aware. She knew that if he wanted to choose the Hellion Jiaoer, he would have to go through her. She stood up from her seat with a piece of pastry in her mouth. Her eyes were still bright and clear. She looked a little like a silly fox and was about to make way for him. "For you." The white cherry blossom in front of her eyes was more low-key than any of the other blooming flowers. However, it faintly revealed a sense of luxury and nobility. It was probably because the person holding it was too otherworldly. Even an ordinary white cherry blossom could make people think of elegance. Hellion Vivian was stunned. Wait a minute. Dear, she must have opened the gun in the wrong way. She was clearly just here to go through the motions. Why did the third prince give her this flower? Could it be that he was going in the wrong direction? Hellion Vivian tried to move her position. The man's deep and narrow eyes under the silver mask darkened. Eunuch Sun became anxious again and directly pushed her. Hellion Vivian looked up and met the man's indifferent lips. Damn! Was it really for her? What the hell? What happened to going through the motions? Cough. Because she wanted to say something but couldn't. Hellion Vivian directly choked on the osmanthus cake in her mouth. She could clearly see the man's incomparably cold gaze when he saw her in such a sorry state. What did the third prince mean? Did he dislike her? He disliked her and even gave her a flower. Lao San. The Emperor Emeritus's expression completely changed when Beligaju stopped in front of Hellion Vivian. Beligaju didn't change. He leisurely brushed off the non-existent dust on his body and said in an indifferent tone, "If you have to choose one, then choose her." What? Everyone couldn't help but cry out in surprise. They looked at Hellion Wei Wei with eyes full of astonishment, and even a bit of anger. Hellion Jiaoer's small face paled even more. The pearls in her hair seemed to have sensed her master's shame and anger, and swayed back and forth. Compared to not daring to believe it, it was more of a loss of face. Why? That slut is just a piece of trash whose engagement was broken off. How could the royal choose her so casually? What's more, she was so dark. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. What did he mean by "if I have to choose one, I'll choose her"? This was a major event related to marriage. How could he use such a casual attitude? Perhaps he really didn't care who he chose, but he shouldn't drag her into it. She, Hellion Vivian, had always disdained to be an accessory. The Empress looked at this scene and her eyes flashed. She said, "Old Third, you and this Miss Hellion still don't understand each other. Giving her a flower is fine, but that doesn't mean that whoever is given the flower will be chosen. Just now, you misunderstood your imperial grandfather's meaning." As she said this, the Empress turned her head and her gaze fell on Hellion Vivian. Her delicate eyebrows wrinkled. "Wei Wei, you've been broken off your engagement by my Murong manner, yet you don't understand the rules at all. The third prince only casually gave you a flower. Is there a need for you to be at a loss like this? It's easy for others to misunderstand." Hellion Vivian chuckled twice in her heart. This woman planned to push all the blame onto her so that the third prince could choose someone else. However, this time she was very willing to cooperate with the other. Her thin lips curved. What the Empress says is right. Empress Murong didn't know when this Hellion Vivian was so good at reading people's expressions. She smiled. Presumably, until now, Miss Murong still doesn't have an ounce of martial chi on her. I don't. After Hellion Vivian finished answering, she added another sentence with a slight smile. "Moreover, I'm still in the inferior compound right now. Whether or not I can pass the test is still unknown." She'll definitely pass the test. Not only the test, she'll even take first place in the armament competition. However, at this moment she actually didn't mind telling a small lie. Empress Murong seemed to have anticipated that she would say this. The complacency at the corners of her mouth became even more obvious. She knew Hellion Vivian's weight better than anyone else in her heart. Her voice also contained some hidden joy. From this, it can be seen that you're still a bit lacking when it comes to matching Old Third. AI, that's right. Hellion Vivian let out a long sigh. She seemed to be very vexed, yet there wasn't a bit of disappointment. Instead, the smile in her eyes became even more profound. Where was the disappointment of being belittled on her face? What was there was only faint ridicule. Beligaju lifted his eyes. When he caught a glimpse of her light smile, his long and narrow peach blossom eyes seemed to quickly conceal a trace of anger. "Then shouldn't you return the flower in your hand to the imperial family?" When the Empress finished speaking, she actually felt a bit surprised. This girl was actually so cooperative with her? This time, Hellion Vivian's answer was even faster. Her voice spread throughout the entire courtyard. Of course, these two words were crystal clear. After she finished speaking, she delivered the white cherry blossom to Beligaju's hand. She looked at the Empress with even more ridicule in her eyes. It was obvious that they looked down on her. It was also obvious that they felt that she wasn't a good match for their precious son. What they wanted had never been a woman. Rather, they wanted the military power that this woman represented. The person who held the military power was the daughter-in-law they wanted. As for her, to them, she was nothing more than a good-for-nothing who had her engagement broken off. The reason why she was so cooperative with the Empress was because she didn't want to marry. She had never thought about marrying anyone. Even if she wanted to marry, she would definitely not marry someone like Beligaju. It wasn't that he wasn't good. On the contrary, he was handsome, calm, and could distinguish right from wrong. He was indeed a good man. But because he was too outstanding, he was very likely to inherit the throne in the future. At that time the harem would be filled with 3,000 people scheming against each other. She didn't want to share a man with other women. She even wanted to break her head and bleed for this man. She wasn't willing to do that kind of thing. Moreover, what she wanted was absolute loyalty. Getting someone who loved her, and cherished her was more important than any glory, splendor, and wealth. In this life she didn't ask for much. She only asked for one person to never leave each other's side. It was obvious that Beligaju wasn't suitable for her. A person who didn't have her in his heart. No matter how perfect he was, she didn't care. The retired emperor, who was sitting on the seat of honor, didn't speak. No one knew what he was thinking. Helian Jiao actually breathed a sigh of relief. At the same time that she loathed Wei Wei, she was secretly delighted in her heart. At least this good-for-nothing was tactful. Bailey Jiaju, as the other person at that time, did not say a word. The silver mask perfectly drowned all his emotions in that pair of deep and slightly restrained phoenix eyes. He looked at the white cherry blossoms that were approaching him. Under his long sleeves, his fingers were slightly stiff, as if he was silently enduring something. Chapter 91. Old Third. Miss Helian has already extended her hand. You should take the flowers. After all, gifting cherry blossoms is not a small matter. Empress Murong looked at Beligaju. Her tone carried discussion. Fortunately, Wei Wei is a sensible child. She knows that you have never participated in the Flower Appreciation Festival, and don't know the meaning of these white cherry blossoms. After she finished speaking, she looked at Helian Vivian and smiled. Right? Wei Wei. Right. Helian Vivian took a step forward, looked at Beligaju, and said boldly and handsomely, Royal, you should give these flowers to someone else. She had never thought of marrying him. Moreover, to him, marrying anyone was the same. She had once heard that the retired emperor had urged the third prince to get married countless times. Unfortunately, the third prince had never had any woman in his eyes. That was why the retired emperor had come up with this plan to let him choose a consort directly at the Flower Appreciation Festival. Looking at the current situation, the third prince was disinclined to fight with the retired emperor. However, he had raised a condition to the retired emperor. As for what that condition was, no one knew. In any case, he was only choosing a consort to deal with the retired emperor. To him, there was no difference between a woman and a man. At most, it would help him escape his current situation. The reason why he chose her was probably to spite the retired emperor. She believed that he was also unwilling to give the flowers to her. If she wasn't such a hedonistic waste and unbearably ugly, he wouldn't have been able to achieve the effect of making the retired emperor unhappy. He wouldn't have said such shocking words. Perhaps he was already regretting it now. Helian Vivian mockingly raised the corners of her eyes and looked at Beligaju with a smile. She was very happy for him to choose again. Those young ladies from aristocratic families dreamed of marrying him, especially Helian Jiao. You don't want this flower? Beligaju's sexy thin lips curved into a smile that wasn't a smile. His temperament was chilly, like the northern wind blowing in winter, cold to the bone. Shadow, who was standing behind him, stiffened. He knew that his master was angry. His Highness was a person who would laugh even harder when he was angry. That kind of laugh was so cold that it made people shudder. He had not heard his master speak in such a tone for a long time. But this time the master was really angry. The consequences of His Highness' anger. And Ying couldn't believe it. His Highness's methods were never gentle, and sometimes even vicious. He was indifferent, but that didn't mean he didn't have a temper. This eldest Miss Helian had truly touched Master's reverse scale. What's the value of something you don't want? Bailey Jiaju continued to speak. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, his fingers moved. Accompanied by his bone-chilling voice, the white cherry blossom in his palm was crushed bit by bit into pieces by him. The surrounding voices immediately stopped. The Empress looked at his cold face and couldn't help but feel her heart skip a beat. Seeing his deep and sharp eyes without a trace of warmth, she really couldn't figure out what he was thinking at this moment. That year, when she was dealing with his birth mother, the Empress didn't feel this much pressure. But every time she saw him, she would feel fear. Hellion Vivian frowned and looked at him, the corners of her eyes slightly raised. What did his words mean? Beligaju was still wearing his ancient black robe. Apart from the black jade thumb ring on his fingertips, he didn't have any extra pendants. The color of the night made him even more cold and elegant. In the silence, his long dark black curly hair poured down in torrents, reaching his waist. His perfect facial features were like a cold river under the moonlight, so cold that it made people tremble. Hellion Vivian wanted to move her gaze away, but his movements were faster than hers. In a flash, he pulled her arm, and his slender fingers pinched her chin, forcing her to look straight into his eyes. That was a pair of eyes as cold as a cold spring, deep and quiet, like a bottomless well. Once you met it, you would be trapped inside. It seemed like she didn't expect him to make such a move. For a moment, the hall was filled with the sound of people taking deep breaths. Hellion Jiao Air's originally pale and colorless face seemed as if all the air had been sucked out in a split second. She tightly gripped the white handkerchief in her hand and bit her lips so hard that they were practically about to bleed. Even the Empress' eyes widened in disbelief. But Beligaju's expression was indifferent, as if there was no one present. The two of them looked at each other like this. In that moment it was like the air had stopped. In the silence, Hellion Wei Wei suddenly had an illusion. She only felt that she and he were the only two people left in this world. Her heart couldn't help beating fast. What did this man want to do? You don't want to be this king's concubine? Hellion Vivian was stunned, but then she obediently replied, this humble girl doesn't dare. Doesn't dare. He gave a low laugh. The strength in his hand was not small, so it gave people a kind of cold-to-the-bone hostility. Hellion Vivian couldn't understand why he repeated her words. She heard his deep voice in her ear. Is there anything in this world that you don't dare to do? She didn't want to have anything to do with him. She couldn't even lie like that. She really was a lamb that couldn't be raised properly. Hellion Vivian also narrowed her eyes. She had always avoided provoking this man, because her master had once said that she shouldn't provoke him no matter what. But she didn't expect that she would be chosen by him just because she came here. Now, his current expression made Wei Wei's body also couldn't help but stiffen for a moment. Having interacted with him for a few days, she'd seen him high and mighty, as noble as a god. She'd also seen him when he was drunk, indolent and demonic. However, she'd never thought that once this man got angry, he'd unexpectedly be so terrifying. Or perhaps he had always been like this. It was just that he usually hid it too well, so well that everyone almost mistakenly thought that the royal family was the incomparably pure holy son. In his mind there was no joy or anger at all. But today she felt his anger. It was like ice rain that could freeze a person from head to toe. Even the blood in their body could be frozen by it. With regards to this highness choice, you dare to make thoughtless remarks. He lowered his eyes and gazed at Wei Wei. That pair of chilly eyes contained all of the world's tyrannical determination to win. His clear and cold words were tantamount to grasping the right to choose in his hands. Slap your mouth. Bailey Jiaju opened his hand slightly. The pieces of white cherry blossoms in his hand fell down one after another, making everyone shudder abruptly. Hellion Wei Wei was also angry. Her eyes were filled with anger. Did she make irresponsible remarks? She just didn't agree to it. Could it be that she didn't even have the chance to refuse? When Hellion Jiao heard this, the corners of her mouth revealed a hint of schadenfreude. She was just a slut so ugly, yet she still dared to take money from His Highness. Wasn't she just looking for death? She deserved it. She wanted to see how this little slut would escape this time. Chapter 92. Hellion Vivian knew that everyone was waiting to see her make a fool of herself. But to slap herself in the face? Sorry. She couldn't do it. And most she would give it her all. No matter how many experts there were in White Academy, she would kill her way out. It was as if he had sensed the murderous aura emitted from her body. Yuan Ming opened his eyes from the silence, waking up the white cat in the fantasy space. Two figures were faintly discernible, just as they were about to appear behind Hellion Vivian. Beligaju's large palm fell on her waist, slightly pushed, and said in a heavy tone, As for you, I will deal with you later. Hellion Vivian was stunned, retracted her murderous aura, and looked at him with a slightly puzzled gaze. Could it be that the person he set to slap herself wasn't her? But what did he mean by deal with her later? Hellion Vivian couldn't help but want to roll her eyes. He might as well say that he wouldn't let her go so easily. She had forgotten that her and the Empress's words just now. It was impossible for someone as smart as him not to see it. She wasn't someone who would be easily manipulated, and she wasn't someone who would tolerate others talking too much. As a prince, wasn't he a bit too narrow-minded? She only said a few words in agreement. Did he have to be so ruthless? Also, if the person who slapped herself wasn't her. Then Hellion Vivian raised her eyes and looked in the direction of the Empress, only to see that her face was already pale, as if she was about to faint. Empress Morong tightly clenched her hands, her body softly leaning on the chair. Looking at Beligaju's appearance, she couldn't help but feel a chill from the bottom of her heart. But, in this kind of situation, let her. Empress, you can leave first. The retired emperor, who had been silent all this time, opened his mouth with a smile. What kind of temper this child has, don't you know? You always want to meddle. As an empress, you should act like one. You just need to take care of the harem. You're interfering with the prince's decisions. Are you trying to make Morong Manor take responsibility? Hearing this, Empress Morong's back stiffened. She didn't dare to say anything else. She allowed the palace maids to help her down. The retired emperor wasn't really trying to absolve Empress Morong. He just didn't want anything to affect Beligaju's consort selection. Right now, he was almost suspecting that this stinking brat was deliberately causing trouble for him. So he deliberately created such a thing. It was all for the sake of not choosing a proper concubine. The more the retired emperor thought about it, the more he felt that this was a possibility. He was so stifled that he gnashed his teeth. When he raised his head, he already looked like an old man who was at peace with everything. Old Third, your tone of voice is too fierce. Look at how scared the Hellion family's girl is. When Hellion Vivian heard this, she kept nodding her head. That's right, she was scared. She was supposed to go through the motions, so how did she become the main character? This was simply cheating without following the rules. Okay? Beligaju glanced at Hellion Vivian and sneered. She still dared to nod her head. When she talked about him being a homosexual behind his back, how come he didn't see her being afraid of him? When she casually sold his handkerchief to other people, how come he didn't see her being afraid of him? This little thing didn't speak a single word of truth. Hellion Vivian noticed the smile on his face, as if he could see through all her disguises. Even his actions just now were only to warn her not to play tricks in front of him. It seemed that he was still extremely fed up with consort selection. Then why did he still give her flowers? Could it be because of that? Hellion Vivian's eyes flashed. She didn't have power and she didn't have influence. Even if she knew he was a homosexual after marriage, she still wouldn't be like the other young ladies of the official's world. For him, this was undoubtedly the best camouflage. In this way, not only could he avoid the retired emperor's repeated warnings, he could also maintain his image as a pure and clean holy son. Black. Too black. Beligaju was too black. Beligaju wouldn't have no reaction when she looked at him like this. He just didn't know what this woman was thinking. However, when that pair of usually indifferent eyes were filled with anger, it was better than doing nothing. The retired emperor looked at the scene below and suddenly frowned. He then raised his arm, looking very tired. All right, it's already so late. I'm also tired. Lao San, you stay. The rest of you can disperse. As for consort selection, let's wait until after the martial chi competition and the results come out. After saying this, the retired emperor reached out and rubbed his forehead. During this time, he didn't forget to glance at Beligaju. When everyone heard this, they knew what the retired emperor meant. He was saying that today didn't count. Of course, everyone was very smart and didn't say anything. Even Hellion Vivian's eyes flashed with joy. It seemed that the retired emperor, this old man, wanted to privately communicate with the third prince about his consort selection. This third prince was really too much. He could give flowers to anyone, but he just had to give them to her. He wanted to use her as a shield to provoke the retired emperor. In the end, the retired emperor was really pissed off and even pissed off. After a while, when there was no one left, the retired emperor would definitely fly into a rage. However, no matter what, finally there was nothing for her to do. This kind of inexplicable feeling of being the main character was really strange. When he caught the smile on her face, Baligaju's thin lips curved upwards, and there was a trace of devilish coldness. Someone seemed to be happy too early. However, it didn't matter. To catch the prey, one had to do it slowly and gradually. First, let it catch its breath and think that it had escaped this trap. Then he reached out his hand and stopped it. Seeing it dejected, that would be interesting. What exactly do you want to do? Bang! Once the others had dispersed, the retired emperor's hand slammed heavily on the wooden table. His face carried the solemn expression of someone who had indulged in authority all year round. It was like a sword that had been unsheathed, flashing with an intimidating cold light and a sharp aura. It shocked the tea and snacks on the wooden table to move. Everyone knew that the retired emperor never got angry easily. His smile and anger were all done to achieve a certain goal. However, today he was really angry. His most beloved grandson actually chose a good-for-nothing who had been annulled by someone else. Why didn't this brat think about it? If he married Hellion Vivian, how would he be able to sit in that position in the main hall in the future? At that time, it would definitely cause a discussion in the imperial court. Without a doubt, it would give the 4 great clans the opportunity to splash dirty water on him. He didn't believe that this stinky brat couldn't see through all of this. This child, from a young age, had displayed wisdom and calmness that didn't match his age. Now that he was already old, perhaps he wouldn't be able to make it through this winter. His son also didn't live up to expectations. He was completely bewitched by Murong, and didn't have his own opinion on anything. Rather than letting the throne be ruined by his son who was addicted to women, it would be better to give it to this stinky brat. However, he just didn't live up to expectations at this crucial moment. Chapter 93. Eunuch's son, who had been by Baligaju's side all year round, didn't even dare to breathe loudly. He clutched the handkerchief in his hand and continuously wiped his forehead, quietly wiping away the cold sweat that had appeared. He was still thinking in his heart, "Master, you mustn't say anything to provoke the retired emperor. Later on, the retired emperor will definitely be angered to death. He will definitely order to kill all the people who know the inside story. In the end, the unlucky ones will be them, the servants. What did you say?" Baligaju yawned as if nothing had happened. He turned around and tidied up his sleeves leisurely, as always indifferent and elegant. Looking at his appearance, the retired emperor fiercely gnashed his teeth. That's right. At that time, I promised you that as long as you were willing to choose a consort, you can choose anyone. It's good that Imperial Grandfather remembers the promise. Baligaju indifferently raised his eyes. His tone was light, and his words were languid. I thought that Imperial Grandfather was going to go back on his word again. Eunuch's son was speechless. Ba Imperial family, my ancestor, you should speak less. Don't you see that the retired emperor is so angry that his beard is blowing up? You still dare to speak? The retired emperor tightly clenched the teacup in his hand. His white eyebrows twitched twice in anger. How could I have thought that you would choose? Oh, tell me, why did you choose Hellion Vivian? During the test she won. This was part of our agreement. I also had no choice. Baligaju's tone was light, as if he was just stating a fact. However, this kind of fact made the retired emperor want to curse out loud. You have no choice? How many excuses and reasons did you use to escape from my consort selection banquet? Now you're saying that you have no choice? Are you the kind of person to be manipulated by others? The retired emperor took a deep breath. He originally wanted to control his volume, but the result was not good. You already knew that she would win? Baligaju still had to be polite and give the retired emperor some face, so he didn't directly answer. Instead, he thought for a while, and then lightly said, I thought about it. That meant he knew. The retired emperor gritted his teeth and said, that Hellion Jower is the real one with both talent and affection. It is even possible that the Phoenix girl's bloodline is hidden in her body. Yet you insist on choosing a dandy who doesn't even know martial chi? Tell me, why did it have to be her? She's more interesting. Even when faced with this kind of raging retired emperor, Bailey Jiaju's attitude didn't change in the slightest. He was still there flicking his fingers, as if he wanted to flick the pollen off his fingertips. However, when he thought of the ridicule exposed by that fearless little fox just now, the light in his eyes became somewhat ice-cold in a flash. Eunuch Sun was dumbfounded. It was because of this reason. Just because of this, you insist on going against the imperial retired emperor. Master, aren't you clearly not cooperating with the retired emperor and acting in a fit of pique? As expected, the retired emperor was unable to restrain his anger and immediately ordered, "Good. Very good. Interesting, right? Someone come take him away from me. I want to see if he still finds that girl interesting after locking him up for 3 days and 3 nights. Everyone was stunned when they heard this. One must know that since childhood, the retired emperor had never punished the third prince. Now he unexpectedly hardened his heart and wanted to lock him up for confinement. The people serving on the left and right glanced at each other, not daring to step forward. They were not afraid of being punished, they were afraid that the retired emperor would regret it after doing this. The atmosphere suddenly froze to the extreme. No one could have foreseen that the retired emperor would be spoken to this extent. Even Shadow was pressured by that thick oppressive feeling and didn't raise his head. If he didn't know about Miss Hulian's behavior these past few days, he would have thought that Master had a different kind of feeling towards her. In reality, thinking about it carefully, perhaps Master just couldn't forgive her for casually kissing him, throwing him 20 tails and treating him as a homosexual girl. What are you still staring blankly for? The retired emperor angrily stood up and even accidentally broke a teacup. Eunuch Sun was scared by that noise and trembled. He hurriedly went to look at his master. Baligaju's expression was still indifferent. The retired emperor couldn't do anything to him, so he turned to Tu Sufeng and gave him a meaningful glance. Tu Sufeng held back his laughter for a long time, lightly coughed twice, and then said, "Please calm down first. Isn't there still a martial qi competition in a few days? The imperial concubine selection will also depend on the results at that time. As for the royal family, just let him continue to stay at White Academy. Just treat it as his punishment." No one knew that when the retired emperor heard Tu Sufeng's words, he slightly sighed in relief. "Just do as you say. Let him stay at White Academy and don't come back, so as to avoid this old man seeing that icy face of his and being annoyed." As he spoke, the retired emperor flicked his sleeve and wanted to leave. He paused his steps, turned around again and cleared his throat. "That icy boy is very picky when it comes to food. You take care of him a bit. Also, if he doesn't want to go to class, don't let him go. It's enough, understand?" To put it bluntly, he was still reluctant. Tu Sufeng smiled gently and elegantly. "Don't worry, I know. Is he still in the inferior compound?" The retired emperor thought for a while and asked another question. Tu Sufeng's mouth twitched. He thought to himself, "Your grandson is right next to you, but you don't ask him. Why do you have to beat around the bush like this?" "Yes, he is." The retired emperor sighed deeply. "That year's matter was all my fault. If it wasn't for me, that fire. Forget it, he can choose whoever he wants." Tu Sufeng smiled and answered, "Yes." Everyone knew that the retired emperor doted on the third prince to the extreme. But this doting was mixed with guilt that had never been told to anyone. If it wasn't for the fact that the retired emperor was too impatient and announced to the world that Bailey Jiaju had 3 types of elements, there wouldn't be so many people, in order to obtain power, who had just broken through the martial qi stage such a vicious attack. That year, what his precious grandson lost was not only martial qi, but also all his hopes for humanity. Ever since his imperial mother passed away, he and that girl depended on each other for survival. But who would have thought that in order to climb up, that girl would collude with outsiders? When he was least prepared, she led the wolf into the house and set the palace on fire. That almost made his precious grandson lose his life. From then on, his precious grandson never got close to any woman again. He was really scared. During that time, his precious grandson didn't even leave the house. After he was scalded, he returned to his previous apathy and indifferent attitude towards everything. But as his grandfather, the retired emperor understood better than anyone that that matter had definitely taken root in his grandson's heart. It wasn't that easy to get rid of it. Chapter 94. Inside the trading courtyard, Grandmaster Zizun suddenly stood up, looking at Hellion Vivian who was drinking tea. He walked back and forth. This won't do. Disciple, it's not that easy to avoid being targeted by that icy brat. What's more, you rejected him in front of so many people. This time, he'll definitely hold a grudge against you. Master, don't worry. The retired emperor has already made the third prince stay. He'll probably punish him. Such a disobedient grandson, he definitely needs to be punished. As Hellion Vivian spoke, she stroked the white cat in her bosom lazily. Grandmaster Zizun shook his head and said, "Girl, you don't know how much the retired emperor dotes on that icy brat. Listen to Master's words, we'll avoid him." Speaking of which, Hellion Vivian seemed to have thought of something as her eyes tightened. He just said that he'll deal with me in a while. Grandmaster Zizun blew his white beard. What did Master say? You didn't take it seriously. Hellion Vivian lazily yawned. How could I have thought that he would choose me? This third prince is really too bored. He wants to find some excitement from me to make the retired emperor angry. Maybe that's the case. Grandmaster Zizun sighed. The retired emperor also wants someone to accompany him. His Highness, this person lives too alone. Hellion Vivian's fingers paused. She didn't say anything. Grandmaster Zizun seemed to have sunk into the past. He told Hellion Vivian everything that happened that year, including the part where the third prince was betrayed. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Master, what are you trying to say by telling me all this? What Master means is, if it doesn't work out, you should just marry him. Grandmaster Zizun raised his head and looked at the ceiling. In any case, you don't have anyone you like. Don't tell me that you're still thinking about that Morong Changfeng? Hellion Vivian rubbed her forehead. Master, don't use words to provoke me. How many times have I said it? I'm not interested in marriage. She finally understood what it felt like to be urged to get married. Really, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She was not selling leftover vegetable leaves at the market. She was not preparing to sell them at a low price after processing them. Alright, even though she was considered an old lady in ancient times, in modern times she was still considered a little fresh meat. Okay? Alright, if you really don't want to marry that icy brat, then you must first leave the White Academy. Grandmaster Zizun looked at her, the light in his eyes slightly sinking. Master also has to go down the mountain in these 2 days, busy with the martial chi competition that will be held soon. You were in the limelight at the Flower Appreciation Festival, so it's hard to avoid attracting jealousy. Master is afraid that if Master leaves and something happens to you at that time, Master won't be able to rush back in time to stand up for you. Furthermore, looking at that icy brat's intentions, he will look for you tonight. The most important thing is that I've called you over this time because I want you to leave the academy for 3 days to participate in an armament convention. Wei Wei's interest was piqued as she lifted her eyes. Armament convention? Is Master talking about the armament assembly where we can compete in the loading and unloading of armaments, and also conduct the auction of armaments? That's right, it's that armament assembly. Grandmaster Zizun smiled. Right now, these people are ridiculing you because you still aren't a genuine armament master. Only by obtaining recognition there will you have the qualifications to be an armament master, and make others believe in you. The armament assembly was extremely important to every armament master. This was a place to unearth talents. It would be held once every 3 years for the sake of unceasingly discovering new blood for armament masters. Grandmaster Zizun wanted Hellion Vivian to go participate for 2 reasons. First, as he said, Hellion Vivian had to pass this test to prove her own strength. Second, the armament assembly was a gathering of talents. Only by encountering a worthy opponent could his obedient disciple's competitive spirit be aroused. He heard that the world's second-ranked young master Wu Shuang would also participate in this year's armament assembly. With regards to this son of his old friend, he had previously done some research. At such a young age, he had already made a good armament. In terms of innate talent, he really didn't know if the other party was stronger or if his disciple was stronger. If it was up to him, this obedient disciple of his was just too good at hiding herself. Until now, she hadn't allowed him to tell other people about her mastery of armaments. Those elders of the academy often felt sorry for him. There were also quite a few teachers who sent people to his place. It was precisely because they saw that his obedient disciple was easy to bully and wanted to replace his obedient disciple's position. Humph! They really thought that he was senile and couldn't understand anything. His obedient disciple was sensible and didn't want to cause trouble for him. Otherwise, he would have already made an armament to torture them to death. However, right now, Grandmaster Zizun's only worry was that he was afraid that his obedient disciple would find it troublesome, so she didn't want to go. Speaking of which, on this point she really was exactly the same as that icy brat. Grandmaster Zizun often had a kind of misconception. Sometimes when he saw his obedient disciple, it was as if he saw that aloof and remote royal family. Indolent, yet never losing his bearing. Seemingly indifferent, yet holding the universe in his hands. Turning his hand to make clouds and turning his hand to make rain. However, the only difference was that that icy brat's heart was too black. It was still his obedient disciple who was cute. Using Nangong Lai's words, this group of old men, were all scared of being abused by Aju. With the royal family at the bottom, he reckoned that whoever they looked at would feel satisfied. Seeing that Hellion Vivian hadn't said anything for so long, Grandmaster even thought that this matter was hopeless. Just as he was about to droop his shoulders, he heard Hellion Vivian ask with a smile on her face, "That armament convention, how do I go?" "Master, here's an invitation card." Grandmaster's eyes lit up. He turned around and flipped out a tungsten gold-colored invitation card. "Half a year ago they already sent me an invitation card. This one right now was taken from Tu Lao. In any case, he has a lot of disciples, and he also has a lot of invitations for the armament convention. He doesn't lack this one. You can take this and go in. No one will dare to stop you." Hellion Vivian took that invitation card. But her mind was thinking about another matter. She could casually participate in that armament competition, but what did the auction represent? It represented money. Such a good opportunity to make money. As the owner of an armament convention, how could she not participate? In a while, she still had to bring the He family's young master along to put up a front. There was no time to lose. She didn't want to be intercepted by the third prince before she even left the door. That man was even more difficult to deal with than she had imagined. She had to first hide. Let's make it clear first. She wasn't afraid of him. It was just that provoking this kind of person was too troublesome. "Master, I'll leave first." Hellion Vivian had always been a person of action. She had never wasted an opportunity. She said, "I'll ask Master to help me apply for a few days of leave from the academy." Grandmaster subconsciously nodded. To tell the truth, he was still a bit dizzy. What exactly did he say to make that disciple of his, who had never liked to be in the limelight, so easily agree? Chapter 95. When Hellion Vivian returned to her residence, the first thing she did was to pack up her bag. She didn't need to bring too many daily necessities. The most important thing was to bring the materials and money for martial arts. If she was bored on the road, she could make a few more martial arts. When the time comes, she could sell them for more money. But what Hellion Vivian didn't expect was that Beligaju's movements would be so fast. Hellion Vivian looked at the layers of guards outside the inferior courtyard. She knew that she couldn't go back. She just went to the toilet and he came. Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows. Her figure flashed and hid under a big tree. Her back was tightly pressed against the trunk, only revealing a pair of clear eyes. "Your Highness." Someone knelt in front of Beligaju and said in a low voice, "Everything is normal." The man raised his eyes and glanced in their direction. Hellion Vivian quickly withdrew her gaze. She had the illusion that her breathing had stopped. Huff huff, she was almost discovered. Although this man didn't have martial chi, his alertness was higher than anyone else. She didn't know if it was because he was used to being in a high position. Even though they were so far apart, Hellion Vivian could feel the oppressive feeling coming from his body. Hellion Vivian just stood there. Her ears were slightly tilted and she didn't move. Now, even the slightest movement would attract the other party's attention. She believed in her concealment and disguise skills. In order to complete the mission, she stayed in the forest for 2 days and 1 night. She wasn't discovered. This was the instinct of an arms tycoon. She made the most accurate judgment at the most appropriate time. When he entered the house, she would withdraw. In a hurry, it was easy to panic. She wasn't anxious. The ones who should be anxious were the guards who had been hiding around her from the beginning. In a while, maybe they could help her delay Beligaju. Hellion Vivian smiled. There was a bit of evil in her laziness. Wait outside. The man's voice was still cold and indifferent, but there was a trace of playfulness in it. Eunuch's son was a little stunned. He didn't quite understand His Highness' decision normally. His Highness would not have reacted this way if he had encountered such a situation. What exactly was going on between His Highness and this Miss Hellion? Hellion Vivian didn't care what Eunuch's son was thinking. Taking advantage of the opportunity, she flashed and escaped from the inferior compound. She hadn't finished packing her things yet. Leaving just like that? Thinking about it, he was really unwilling. However, it was better than being blocked. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian turned around and smiled. She blew a cool kiss towards the window and said goodbye to the handsome royal. Oh no, there was no need to say goodbye. That's more like it. Hellion Wei Wei was originally an arms tycoon, so she was most adept at this kind of traveling at night. She first bypassed several locust trees to avoid the academy's tight encirclement, as well as those teachers holding lanterns on night patrol. She successfully infiltrated the superior compound, and at this time, after Bailey Jiaju pushed open the door and saw the half-packed package on the bed, his pair of eyes instantly became extremely cold. With a swish, he pulled the curtain shut and turned around with an indifferent expression. Then he slowly walked out. His footsteps were somewhat slow, as if he didn't care. But no one discovered that his eyes slowly narrowed in the darkness. The bottom of his eyes that couldn't be seen had a coldness that made people's hearts clench. Then he laughed. His thin lips slightly curved, seemingly there but not there, carrying a bewitching coldness that made people's hearts tremble. Eunuch's son's eyes slightly raised. When he met the coldness in the royal's eyes, he was completely stunned. The foot that originally wanted to enter the room was also abruptly pulled back. Where is she? Beligaju only asked this one question. His voice was so cold that it made the shadows shiver for no reason. One of the shadows replied, "Reporting to your highness, Miss Hellion should have gone to the toilet. It was inconvenient for us to follow her, so we..." Toilet? The coldness in Beligaju's eyes faded a little, and he walked back in. It was only a small room, but the furnishings were very neat. That package was an unusual eyesore. His slender fingers opened it from the middle. There weren't any clothes inside, but instead piles of black iron. However, those black iron weren't very rare. They could be bought at any martial arts store. In the middle of the night, she went to the toilet. As for packing these things, Beligaju's slightly narrowed eyes quickly flashed through something. Slowly, a bone-chilling coldness rose. He still underestimated her. An untrained fox would always first come over and obediently let you touch her. Then she would ruthlessly give you a claw. Everything was normal. She had clearly planned to leave from the very beginning. Good, very good. If she wanted to play, he would play with her. Beligaju curved his lips into a smile. It was like some kind of black fog was emitted from his eyes, making people feel cold to the bone. He threw away the package in his hand. The iron pieces made a crackling sound. No one dared to speak. The air seemed to be frozen. Everyone didn't dare to look at him. The shadows lowered their heads even more. The matter of guarding Miss Hellion was given to them by His Highness, but they actually didn't know when Miss Hellion disappeared, that Miss Hellion was really bold. Master already told her to wait, but she still didn't want to see him. If she was caught by His Highness at this moment, I'm afraid. Beligaju's eyes sank slightly. His voice was also cold to the extreme. He ordered one word at a time. Go find her for me. She still hadn't left the academy. That tea was still hot. Maybe she really went to the toilet. Only after she came back from the toilet and saw the guards outside, she took the opportunity to escape. She really was a clever little fox that made people want to chop off her claws. At this moment, Hellion Vivian indeed hadn't left the academy. She still had to find her companions. Only from far away, she saw a large number of guards moving quickly, as if they were blocking the entrances of every branch. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. He deserved to be the third prince. She even thought that he would be misled by those shadows' words for a few minutes. She didn't expect that his reaction would be so fast. He immediately knew that she wasn't going to the toilet, but rather to escape. As expected, he wasn't easy to deal with. However, relying on these guards, they wanted to catch her? She reckoned that they were all busy blocking the entrances. They simply didn't think that she never planned to leave now. If she didn't bring her own facade along, it would be useless for her to go to that armament convention. First of all, she had to first meet up with Heizei. The person who passed on the message should have already told Heizei what she wanted to say. When the great young master dressed up, it would always take some effort, however. Shouldn't she let Little White use the magic power in its body to first summon a divine beast over? Otherwise, to go to such a distant place like the summit of the sea, an ordinary carriage would need to travel for 10 days before arriving. By that time, the armament convention would have already ended. Just as Hellion Vivian closed her eyes to think about things, someone suddenly pulled her from behind. A faint sandalwood scent burrowed into the tip of her nose. Chapter 96. Hellion Vivian turned her head and looked over. Her long, shapely eyebrows wrinkled. It was actually Murong Changfeng. How could this scum appear here? You said you already put down my family's young master, yet you still came in the middle of the night to wait. The servant's tone of voice made Hellion Vivian coldly laugh. She didn't say anything and directly pushed Murong Changfeng's hand away. If it weren't for the night being too dark, the ridicule in her eyes would have been exposed unintentionally. Murong Changfeng didn't expect himself to be pushed away. His fingers stiffened. That servant was actually not happy. I say, Miss Hellion, you've already come. What are you still putting on airs for? Don't tell me this is all a coincidence. You don't know this is the courtyard where my family's young master lives. Hellion Vivian. She really didn't know. Enough. Murong Changfeng's voice faintly stopped that servant's words. However, it could be seen that he and that servant were basically thinking the same thing. Since you've already come, just say it clearly. Hellion Vivian sized him up with a glance and turned around to leave. What was there to say to a scum? Not to mention, Third Prince was such a smart person. Maybe he'd find the superior compound in a moment. She didn't want to waste time in this kind of place. Hellion Vivian, what do you mean? Murong Changfeng extended his hand and blocked her path with his slightly raised sleeve. You should have played enough with the game of loosening the reins in order to get closer, right? You felt that this young master made you lose face before, so you retaliated several times in a row in front of people. What do you still want now? You want this young master to regret? Hellion Vivian, who do you think you are? Being blocked like this, Hellion Vivian simply crossed her arms and raised her head in amusement. Murong Changfeng, I advise you to look in the mirror more in the future. Do you really think you're so handsome that you can shock the heavens and make ghosts weep, and that I can't live without you? What you said, I'll return it to you. Murong Changfeng, who do you think you are? Loosening the reins in order to get closer? Didn't I say it clearly enough? I was blind in the past, that's why I fell for a scumbag like you. You're still young, so it's inevitable that you don't have good taste. This is the same reason why you fell for Hellion Jiaoer. Now that my mind is sound, I want to turn over a new leaf. Do you understand? If you understand, then get out of the way. As expected of the woman that I have taken a fancy to. She's ruthless enough. I like her. Suddenly, an evil laugh sounded from behind the two of them. Hellion Vivian looked back and saw the late second young master of the He family standing under the cherry blossom tree. He was holding a package in one hand and patting the back of his hand with the other. There was a hint of playfulness in his arrogance. He looked like he was watching a show. Murong Changfeng had originally been mocked by Hellion Vivian's words until his face turned white. Now that he heard Heizei's words, anger rose in his eyes. I didn't expect that the grand young master of the He family would do things so sneakily. Sneaking around? Young Master Murong, don't talk nonsense. Wei Wei and I are in love with each other. She asked me out this time, not you. Heizei slowly walked over. His waist-length cloak fluttered in the night wind, giving off a sense of oppression that was hard to ignore. Hellion Vivian heard his words and didn't say anything. She only looked at him indifferently. Did you bring everything? And humph. Heizei said while not forgetting to raise his chin in Murong Changfeng's direction. That meant, you see, I already said that she came to look for me. Hellion Vivian didn't want to play out any unexpected drama. She reached out and pulled Zay over. Her tone was indifferent. If you brought everything, then let's go. Why are you wasting words with him? Hearing this, Murong Changfeng's face suddenly became cold to the extreme. He ground his teeth and made creaking sounds. The little servant standing beside him opened his mouth into an O shape. He didn't expect that this woman really didn't come to look for the young master, but rather to wait for young Master He. This wasn't the main point. The main point was the young master's expression. The little servant somewhat didn't dare to raise his head. Murong Changfeng seemed to have reached the extreme, but didn't have a place to vent his anger. He kicked the little servant's body. What are you still staring blankly for? Light the lantern and return to the room. Yes, yes. The little servant was kicked until he almost spat out blood. The pain made his usual arrogance and complacency completely disappear. He bent his waist and lowered his head, carefully serving, for fear that he would provoke his master again. This kind of noise naturally alarmed the other people at the superior compound. Although the men and women lived separately, people like Heli and Jiaoer would always send servants to each courtyard to inquire for information. Therefore, the superior compound didn't have any secrets to her. Not long after, she found out what happened at Murong Changfeng's place. Her eyes slightly brightened. She slowly hooked up a malicious smile. Privately leaving the hospital, Heli and Vivian, you really dare. Someone come. Heli and Jiaoer, who originally already took off her clothes, put on a cloak. Her thin lips slightly curved. We're also going outside to walk around. Yes. The servant girl by Heli and Jiaoer's side understood her young Mrs. thoughts better than anyone else. Knowing that she wanted to go give that slut a good look, her face also followed with a smile. The night deepened. Heli and Vivian saw that wherever she went, there were layers upon layers of imperial bodyguards. Her eyebrows wrinkled into a ball. This third prince's methods were really ruthless. Just for the sake of catching her, so many people were mobilized. This was the rhythm of waiting until she was caught. Then she would be dismembered into 10,000 pieces. All of this was provoked by you? He family's young master stood behind her, impatiently raising his eyebrows. Heli and Vivian grunted. Third prince's people. Zay heard the three words third prince and narrowed his eyes. Speaking of which, why did the royal family choose you? Didn't you think that choosing me would be easier to create a sensation? Heli and Vivian laughed. It can't be that because I'm too beautiful he was bewitched by my beauty? Zay's mouth twitched. Beauty? You? So, he must have chosen me to anger the retired emperor. Heli and Vivian shrugged. You can't reject a marriage like this. Zay found it easier to accept this explanation. When I said that I wanted to marry you, it wasn't to anger my old man. I was sincere. Heli and Vivian only gave him 2 words. Sincere? This face of mine, can you accept it? Zay looked at those imperial bodyguards who were walking back and forth. After thinking for a while, he seriously replied. Actually, it's the same even if you blow out the candles. Anyway, your figure is not bad. Thank you, but your figure, I don't fancy it. Heli and Vivian laughed evilly. Even if I blow out the candles, the royal family can still beat you. Zay was stunned, then slowly curved his thin lips. His fingers lightly slid through Heli and Vivian's hair. A trace of sexiness appeared on his handsome and domineering face. Woman, this prince seems to be more and more interested in you. Chapter 97. Zay, do you need me to remind you one more time? Heli and Vivian took his hand away and said indifferently, We're cooperating right now. Zay smiled. To be honest, we have such a tacit understanding. We'll definitely be very suitable together. You and your right hand have such a tacit understanding. Why don't you just directly marry your right hand? Heli and Vivian dropped this sentence and turned around to change her position, continuing to conceal herself. The corner of Zay's mouth twitched twice. The right hand she's talking about better not mean what he's thinking. She's a girl. How can she be even more daring than a man when she speaks? That won't do, the two of us are too big of a target. Heli and Vivian turned her head and glanced at the He family's young master. We'll split up and act separately. When the time comes, we'll meet again at the armaments convention. Zay didn't care. After all, this young master can swagger out. Then, young master, you can slowly walk. Hellion Vivian raised the corner of her mouth and disappeared into the night. She didn't think that the news of the Hay family's young master being together with her wouldn't be known by others. Pushing Zhe out to divert that person's line of sight, this method was still pretty good. Your Highness, we've already investigated. Shadow looked at his master's demonically cold pair of eyes and swallowed his saliva. Miss Wei Wei is currently at the Superior Compound. Beligaju absent-mindedly raised his eyes. Superior Compound? What did she go there for? Seems. Shadow paused at this point and braced himself. She went to look for the Hay family's second young master. Hearing this, Beligaju's stride seemed to stiffen. Then, he tilted his head and laughed lowly. His bangs followed his movements and slightly drooped down. Looking at him from afar, he actually looked a bit lonely. When Shadow wanted to take a closer look, he saw Bailey Jiaju suddenly raise his eyes and unhurriedly take off the white glove on his hand and throw it to the side. His eyes were frighteningly bright, without the slightest hint of loneliness. Instead, it made him look more elegant and dangerous than usual, as if something was about to burst out of his eyes. Aning didn't know if it was an illusion or not, but he felt that the martial qi in his body seemed to be affected by some kind of fluctuation, and even his breathing became somewhat difficult. The moment his fingers touched his chest, that strange feeling mysteriously disappeared. Then, he heard his master's voice, which carried a cold indifference amidst the elegance, then capture he eyes as well. No matter who she's with, bring her to me. Shadow trembled and respectfully bowed his head. Yes. Don't remove the other checkpoints either. Beligaju pondered for a moment, and his cold voice carried a smile that made people's scalps tingle. That woman is best at making a diversion. Shadow accepted the order, but he couldn't help but say in his heart, His Highness' thoughts are still as deep as before. He didn't remove the checkpoints at all. Right now, even if Hellion Vivian had 3 heads and 6 arms, she still wouldn't be able to escape. His Highness really didn't treat anyone carelessly. With this kind of attitude, don't mention a woman without martial qi, even those experts would have to expend a lot of effort to get out. However, Beligaju felt that this wasn't enough. His beautiful phoenix eyes once again narrowed. Keep an eye on the Commerce Courtyard. She's very likely to contact Jizun. Want to leave with he eyes? He'd like to see if he could pull out her claws. How could she leave? Yes. Shadow's heart thumped. He felt that the current His Highness was even more frightening than before. If it was said that when he discovered that Hellion Vivian was missing, his face revealed anger, then now, that pair of eyes that seemed to be smiling yet not smiling emitted a demonic chill that could almost freeze a person's blood. He'd followed His Highness for so many years, but he'd never seen him like today. Moreover, in this world there was simply no one who could truly oppose His Highness. In the past, His Highness had never cared about these things. But when His Highness became serious, he was even more frightening than the retired emperor. Capturing Hellion Vivian was something that would happen sooner or later. The entire White Academy was surrounded by their people. Even he, who was clear about all the deployments, might not be able to escape, let alone Hellion Vivian, who knew nothing about all this. However, did Hellion Vivian really know nothing about this? Of course not. Know yourself and know your enemy. Then you'll be victorious in 100 battles. How could she act rashly when she didn't understand anything? On the contrary, she was very clear about Beligaju's deployments and plans, because she wasn't at any other place at all. Instead, she'd infiltrated into the ranks of the Imperial bodyguards. Wherever Beligaju went, she would follow. But even so, when she heard Beligaju's voice, she still couldn't help but shiver. This man really didn't give her any chance to live. Fortunately, she could rely on her past life's experience to continue her disguise. Otherwise, wherever she went, she'd be stopped and killed. Hellion Vivian took a deep breath and continued to act as her bodyguard. For the first time, she was glad that her skin was dark enough. Mixing in with this group of men, she wouldn't be found out. Thinking carefully, where did she provoke such a difficult man to deal with? Didn't she just reject him once? Wasn't the third prince a bit too fragile? He didn't really want to marry her. Hellion Vivian sighed in her heart. Yuan Ming arrogantly comforted her. You can tell that man that the person you love is me. Don't let him steal your love. Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. Shut up, thank you. Woman, don't deny it anymore. If you don't love me, why would you hug me so tightly? Yuan Ming proudly snorted twice. Your little thoughts have already been seen through by me. Hellion Vivian was melancholy. Where did you get your confidence from? Wake up, will you? Forget it, since you're so shy, I won't force you. But speaking of which, that man, even now, I still can't see through him. You should be careful, I keep feeling that things aren't that simple. Yuan Ming recovered his normal tone. Looking at Beligaju's back, the light in his eyes deepened. Hellion Vivian nodded. She always knew that the third prince was very difficult to deal with. In this empire that respected martial arts, he was actually able to make the people from the 4 great clans fear his existence, even though he had lost his martial chi. That meant that not only his methods, even his thoughts were unmatched in the entire Dragon War Empire. It seemed that Heizei wouldn't be able to hold on for long. She had to think of another way to evacuate as soon as possible. How's Xiaobai's side? Hellion Vivian followed the bodyguards and walked forward. At the same time, she used her consciousness to communicate with Yuan Ming. Yuan Ming's voice was heavy. Everything is going according to plan. After leaving the academy, there will be a mythological beast that will take you down the mountain. Mythological beast? Hellion Vivian's footsteps stopped. A shrewd light flashed through her long and narrow eyes. Chapter 98. Your Highness, we've found young Master He. A shadow ran over and leaned over to whisper a few words into Beligaju's ear. Beligaju's beautiful eyes didn't have the slightest ripple, but the cold wind brought by those wide sleeves made his back look even more unapproachable, extremely cold. After a short while, Beligaju arrived in front of the detained He. The shadows naturally wouldn't really do anything to young Master He. He had only blocked the exit. However, just this alone was already extremely daring. In the entire capital, only the third Prince Beligaju dared to block the second young master of the He family. When He saw him, the corner of his mouth hooked up. Your Highness is truly elegant. Not sleeping at this late hour? Isn't the second young master also not sleeping? Beligaju's voice was very indifferent, as if he didn't care about anything, but it carried an irresistible demonic chill. Where is she? When He was blocked, he cursed in his heart, fuck. Then he started to think of all kinds of excuses, thinking about how he would greet the third prince when he arrived, and how he would gradually change the situation. But the third prince didn't play his cards according to common sense at all, and immediately asked, where is she? Such elegant and direct words made Hei's completely stupefied. All the plans he made before were completely for naught. The third prince clearly knew more than he thought. When he thought of this, He straightforwardly smiled evilly. If the royal is referring to Wei Wei, she has already left the academy. The 2 words Wei Wei made Beligaju's eyes darken, and the smile at the corner of his mouth was even deeper than usual. Left? That's right, she has already left. He spoke with incomparable sincerity. We originally agreed to go down the mountain together, but later, she seemed to be very anxious and left early. Right now, she should be close to the main road. If your Highness sends someone to chase after her, they should be able to catch up. Beligaju looked deeply at him, elegant and indifferent. I still have to thank the second young master for providing me with such an important clue. This commoner only did what a commoner should do. He curled his lips into a smile, his face tinged with a bit of pride. He felt that he had never been so quick-witted before. Bailey Jiajuan hurriedly turned the black jade ring on his finger as he faintly instructed Shadow. Let second young master leave. Yes. Shadow hesitated for a moment, somewhat not daring to believe that his family's highness would just let the He family's young master go like this. He clearly had something going on between him and Miss Hellion. Maybe if he investigated, he could find out. However, Beligaju didn't think so. That little fox purposely released Hei's as a smokescreen in order to delay him. There was no need for him to waste time on Hei's. Furthermore, continue searching for this lord and narrow down the search area. She hasn't gone anywhere, she's still at the superior compound. Upon hearing this, not only did Hei's, who was about to leave, freeze, even Hellion Vivian, who was hidden in the group, felt her heart skip a beat. Hei's lie had been seen through. Not only that, that man actually used reverse thinking to analyze Hei's words and locked onto her correct position. This time her situation was even worse moreover, since the third prince already gave the order to let Hei's go, then Hei's must go. In other words, from now on she really was fighting by herself. Helian Wei bit her thin lips and looked at the silhouette in the dim light of night that was still as tall and straight as a pine tree. That person's every movement was neither hurried nor impatient. His long and jade-like body tidied up his sleeves, as if everything was within his control. Or perhaps it could be said that he did it on purpose. He deliberately took Hei's away, thereby severing the connection between her and Hei's. Without Hei's she could still succeed. Although it would be a bit more difficult, but if it wasn't difficult, then it would be called concealment. Helian Vivian lowered her head and followed those imperial bodyguards back to the courtyard. Unfortunately, she was only one step away from the entrance. Just that one step away, she could only look on helplessly as the academy's main door closed in front of her, because right now, any abnormal movements would be detected by the other party. She couldn't take the slightest risk. The third prince was too smart, one couldn't see through his tricks. Right now she could only deal with all changes by sticking to the status quo, keeping her eyes and ears open, and wait for the right time to think of a way to sneak out. However, Helian Vivian didn't see that when Beligaju raised his eyes, a trace of coldness flashed through his eyes. He slowly curved his lips as if he was displeased, but also as if he was pondering. He wanted to see how she would deal with Hei's after he took him away. Look for him, or continue to hide like this. But no matter what it was, if she was smart enough, then she wouldn't drag other people into this. Because that would make him very, very unhappy. When Shadow, who was following beside Beligaju, saw his master's expression, he couldn't help but secretly break out in cold sweat for a certain someone. His Highness was really angry this time. In all these years there had never been a time like this, where His Highness was so unwilling to let go. In the past, His Highness was neither hot nor cold towards anything. No one could guess what he was thinking, so much so that no one could cause any of his emotions to fluctuate. Helian Vivian was the first person to make His Highness go through so much trouble. Shadow almost didn't dare to imagine what would happen to her if she was really caught by His Highness. Achoo! Helian Vivian covered her mouth and sneezed softly. From the time she started to plan this escape, 2 hours had already passed. She had to be quick. Right now Beligaju didn't have time to spare, but when he was free, his first reaction would be to check on her. At that time even this bodyguard's skin on her body wouldn't be able to protect her. Should she be happy or should she admit that she was unlucky? After doing so many things, this was the first time she was forced into such a situation. However, the real show had just begun. Right now, it was the time when humans were the most tired, and also the time when it was the easiest to make mistakes. She could totally make use of this point. Pitter-patter-patter. A light rain suddenly fell from the sky. Shadow hurriedly opened an umbrella for Beligaju. As he walked forward, he reported, "Your Highness, we've searched the entire superior compound, but didn't find any trace of Miss Helian. Still didn't find her." Beligaju's hand slightly paused for a moment. He actually underestimated that little fox's tenacity. Good, very good. Beligaju narrowed his eyes. His voice was neither cold nor light. Switch to another group of bodyguards and continue the search. The ones who are switched out are not allowed to leave the hospital. They are to rest where they are. It was easy for an exhausted person to have a loophole. He absolutely wouldn't allow this kind of loophole to appear in his plan. Helian Vivian originally thought that after being switched out, she would be able to return to her room. She didn't expect. This third prince wasn't just smart, he was simply too two-faced. So ruthless that it almost made people unable to withstand. Chapter 99. At this moment, an enchanting figure walked over with 2 servant girls behind her. One servant girl held a lantern while the other held an umbrella. In this white academy, it was like a painting of misty rain in Jiangnan. It was Helian Jiaor. She wore a red cloak. Although that small face didn't have makeup, it was more gentle and beautiful than usual. When she saw Beligaju, she shyly saluted and then said to Eunuch's son, who was still busy, "I heard that eldest sister disappeared, so I wanted to come out and look for her." "Eunuch's son, do you have news of her?" Eunuch's son had already fainted from being so busy. It was already so late, and now he only wanted to sleep. He tiredly shook his head and didn't say anything. Hellion Vivian, who was standing among the bodyguards, moved her body and stared at the two servant girls behind Hellion Jiaoer. No matter what the purpose of Hellion Jiaoer coming out at this time was for her, perhaps this was a good opportunity. Then did you find young Master He? Hellion Jiaoer continued to speak, her beautiful eyebrows lightly wrinkled, as if she was worried about Hellion Vivian's conduct. My eldest sister always does things without regard for consequences. Old Master He didn't agree to her and Hei's matter, so she went to the superior compound in the middle of the night. Now she's gone missing. I'm really worried that she'll take things too hard and ruin her own reputation. Eunuch's son raised his eyebrows. This meant that Miss Vivian did this today because she wanted to elope with young Master He? Just after His Highness gave her the white cherry blossoms, she eloped with another man. Eunuch's son cautiously raised his eyes, and under that faint moonlight, he glanced in the direction of his master. Still the indifference of a tall jade figure, still the cold air that was hard to approach, still that proud and elegant, so arrogant that it made people's hearts tremble, but the coldness in her eyes made Eunuch's son shrink his neck. He turned his head to face Hellion Jiaoer and said, Young Lady Jiaoer, you can't speak carelessly. The He family's second young master has already descended the mountain. We personally stopped the carriage, but we didn't find young Lady Wei Wei. If your words were heard by others, it would become a big matter. It wouldn't be good if people misunderstood that you sisters don't get along well. With so many things happening today, Eunuch's son was already trembling with fear. If it was any other time, he definitely wouldn't have said it so bluntly. After all, the other party was the young miss of the general's manor. The people of the four great clans were very protective of her. Even the retired emperor considered her as a candidate for the third imperial concubine. However, this Hellion Jiaoer was really too much. His Highness was already in a bad mood, but she still came over to add oil to the fire. Did she really think that others couldn't see through her tricks? They were just tricks that were used to fight in a large courtyard. In the eyes of these people who stayed in the palace all year round, it was as boring as a child playing house. Even an old eunuch like him didn't put her in his eyes, let alone his family's highness who had deep thoughts. He reckoned that his master just didn't want to talk nonsense with this Hellion Jiaoer. Eunuch's son also didn't say anything more. With a flick of the horsetail whisk in his hand, he followed Beligaju and left. Probably because they were worried about the appearance of the Hellion Jiaoer, so none of them discovered that after they left, one of the bodyguards actually disappeared inexplicably. The Hellion Jiaoer who ate a soft nail from Eunuch's son tightly clenched the handkerchief in her hand. Her eyes were filled with malice, but she had already achieved her goal. She didn't believe that the royal would remain indifferent after hearing her words just now. That cheap woman's good reputation would remain until today. Not returning home at night was a punishment in the White Academy. If that cheap woman still didn't appear at dawn tomorrow, it would confirm that there was something shameful between her and young Master He. She didn't care about what Eunuch's son said just now. Even if that cheap woman was innocent, she still wanted to take this opportunity to once again ruin her reputation. The Hellion Jiaoer's eyes were filled with satisfaction. Just as she was about to leave, she discovered that the servant girl who held the lantern for her had her head down. She didn't know what she was doing, so she unhappily berated her. Still not quickly bringing the lantern over? You don't have the least bit of eyesight. Yes. That servant girl respectfully walked over. She didn't know if it was because the sky was too dark, but she was really afraid that the Hellion Jiaoer would fall. From beginning to end, she kept her eyes down and obediently held the lantern. She didn't even lift her head. As for Bailey Jiaju, who had just strolled into the superior compound, he seemed to have thought of something. Suddenly, his pair of eyes tightened and his voice was extremely cold. All of the imperial bodyguards, gather here and count the number of people. The shadows stared blankly. They didn't understand why their master would give such an order. After they truly gathered, a thin layer of cold sweat appeared on their foreheads. Reporting to your highness, we're missing one. We're missing one. Beligaju sneered as he repeated these words. His voice penetrated with a bone-piercing iciness, making everyone shrink their necks. Especially the shadow who followed Beligaju all year round. What did it mean that the bodyguards were missing one person? It meant that it was very possible that Hellion Vivian had just disguised herself among them and listened to their plan right under their noses. And they didn't detect anything at all. Should he praise that eldest miss of the Hellion family for her top-notch disguise skills? Or should he say that she wasn't afraid of death? This Hellion Vivian was the first person who dared to despise his master's imperial might. Good, truly good. Beligaju slowly pulled out a smile. That kind of evildoer's iciness didn't reach the bottom of his eyes. Instead, it made people feel that their entire bodies were stiff. Even Eunuch Sun sensed the strangeness of this matter. How could there be one less bodyguard at this time? Oh my God, please don't be what he's thinking. How could this eldest miss of the Hellion family be so bold? She even dared to pretend to be one of His Highness' bodyguards. Beligaju's tightened hands slightly loosened. What followed was the swaying of the large tree behind him and the raging wind. His hair, which was as dark as night, fluttered in the wind like a snake slithering in the grass. That pair of phoenix eyes, which had always been covered by indifference, flickered with light. Leaves rustled and fell from the tree trunk. He tilted his head, as if he was thinking about something. After a long time, that kind of bone-chilling voice sounded again. How many servant girls were following Hellion Jiaoer just now? How many servant girls? Eunuch Sun stared blankly. This kind of thing generally wouldn't be noticed by anyone. Replying to Your Highness too. Shadow recalled for a moment and finally decisively replied with a number. Capture all of them. Bailey Jiaju retracted his gaze from the imperial bodyguards. His tall and straight back was as straight as a pine tree in the Tsang Mountains. His indifferent indifference made people feel no warmth. He walked to the center of the crowd. Everyone subconsciously held their breaths. Because they knew that this time, that Hellion Vivian really couldn't escape. Chapter 100. The superior compound was only that big. It was very easy to catch someone. What's more, the royal family found 2 servant girls. Apart from the Hellion Jiaoer, who was somewhat surprised, the rest of the people were confused. Now, basically everyone in the superior compound was awake. Some young ladies from influential families, in order to be able to see Beligaju, also temporarily put on a cloak and let the servant girls hold an umbrella for them as they watched from the side. The Hellion Jiaoer looked at her 2 servant girls, the light in her eyes full of deep meaning. At this time, why would the royal family suddenly want to see her servant girls? Could it be? The Hellion Jiaoer's thoughts turned. She wanted to reach out and grab the 2 servant girls' hair, to take a good look at their appearance, second sister. Helplessly, this scene was interrupted by Hellion Mei, who came from the west. She walked over without a care, her voice carrying a sense of schadenfreude. What stupid thing did that slut do again, to make the royal family spend so much effort to catch her? The Hellion Jiaoer looked at the surrounding royal guards, who cast their gazes in their direction, wishing she could sew Hellion Mei's mouth shut. She didn't want to say anything more to Hellion Mei, so as to avoid her own taste also being dragged down. Why didn't she notice before? This younger sister of hers was so stupid. There were so many people present, yet she still brazenly called Hellion Vivian a slut. Was she afraid that others wouldn't know she didn't have a good upbringing? What these young ladies from influential families of the superior compound hated the most was people shouting loudly, and Hellion Mei had all of that. When they had just entered the school, she could tell everyone that this younger sister of hers was young and had a naive temperament. But after going through so many things, what the sisters needed the most was to re-establish their own network of contacts. Hellion Mei still didn't understand the situation. She was simply beyond saving. Wait until later, she had to properly talk to her father and think of a way to send her out of White Academy, so that she wouldn't make a fool of herself here. Hellion Mei was not an ignorant person. Now that she saw Hellion Jiaoer ignoring her, it was obvious that Hellion Jiaoer was giving her a cold shoulder. However, Hellion Mei didn't dare to say anything. The smile on her face froze, and she was as embarrassed as she could be. The sound of footsteps could be heard from afar. The Hellion Jiaoer smiled shyly and looked in the direction of Beligaju. Beligaju didn't even look at the 2 sisters. His gaze fell on the 2 maidservants. His black eyes were distant and indifferent, and there was an irresistible sense of oppression in the calmness. The 2 maidservants lowered their heads. In fact, one of them was trembling very badly, as if she had done something wrong. Even her fingers were trembling. Beligaju narrowed his eyes. With a wave of his hand, the hair ornament on the maidservant's head fell to the ground. Looking at the person's appearance again, it was clear that she wasn't Hellion Vivian, and she wasn't someone who often followed Hellion Jiaoer. Who are you? The Hellion Jiaoer pointed at the strange girl who suddenly appeared. The girl stuttered and kowtowed. Your Highness, please spare me. Yes, someone just gave me money and asked me to change clothes with her. I changed. I don't know anything. Beligaju listened indifferently to the girl's words. His eyes flashed slightly. What clothes were you wearing before? A cyan cloth skirt. The girl smelled the man's sandalwood scent and her mind went blank. Beligaju didn't make a fuss this time. Instead, his lips slowly pulled out a light smile. She really knows how to buy people's hearts. Money? Sure enough, it's a good thing. Your Highness, do you want this subordinate to go look for the girl wearing the cyan cloth skirt now? Shadow took a step forward and also became nervous. Beligaju curved his thin lips and slowly straightened his body. Brushing off the non-existent dust on his clothes, he said, "No need." According to her way of doing things, she definitely won't leave any clues behind. If she leaves anything behind, it means she did it on purpose. Right now, she can wear any color of clothes, but she won't wear a cyan cloth skirt. Standing in the middle of the servants, Hellion Vivian silently cursed in her heart. This third prince was so hard to deal with that it made her teeth hurt. Dear, is it really good to be so smart? Be careful that you won't be able to find a wife. That's right, Hellion Vivian had already changed into a servant. She wouldn't wear the same set of clothes for more than half an hour. That way it was very likely that she would give herself away. However, the problem now was that this was the last time she would change her clothes. The more people she made unconscious, the more flaws she would reveal. At that time, she would still fall into the third prince's evil clutches. No, she couldn't go on like this. She had to leave the hospital as soon as possible. However, it was definitely impossible for him to walk on land. Originally, she didn't want to make such a big commotion. But the third prince was chasing her so closely, she had no choice but to use her trump card. Yuanming. Hellion Vivian lowered her voice and said in a light tone, "Let Little White bring more spirit beasts over." Didn't the third prince want to compete with more people? Let's compete for him to see. Yuanming had never been as excited as he was today. As a demon that depended on his master, the stronger his master's desire to win, the more his blood boiled. However, "Woman, it's rare to see you so nervous." Hellion Vivian chuckled. "You're not nervous? If you're not nervous, you can try fighting with the royal family. You'll be played to death in minutes." Yuanming admitted this point. After a few rounds, his brain was not enough. That man still had a look of absolute control over life and death, as if he had great power in his hands. He hadn't seen such a person for a long time. Except for that person from a long time ago. But it was impossible for that person to appear here. At this time, he shouldn't have woken up yet. Yuanming restrained his thoughts. His figure flashed and disappeared into the boundless night. In order to match her current identity, Hellion Vivian also moved. Her fingers held the handle of the umbrella, holding it for a young master. She couldn't help but say that she was very lucky. If it wasn't for the rain, it would have been much easier for Beligaju to find her. But what she didn't expect was that Beligaju's next sentence was, "Put down all the umbrellas in your hands." What? Hellion Vivian was secretly shocked, but she tried her best to calm herself down and maintain her previous posture. Following that, she heard Eunuch Sun's cry of alarm. "That won't do, Your Highness. The rain is too heavy. If you don't hold an umbrella, your body." Hellion Vivian stared blankly. In order to catch her, he actually didn't even hold up his own umbrella. Looks like the third prince is serious this time. Even the imperial bodyguards were cold and couldn't hold up their umbrellas. Hellion Vivian clenched her teeth. Wait until she escaped this calamity and came back from the armament conference. She definitely had to find a chance to properly ask the third prince. What kind of enmity did he have with her that was worth him spending so much effort? Chapter 101. Eunuch Sun was directly stunned. Even his master didn't hold an umbrella. As a servant, he could only clench his teeth and have the person next to him put away the umbrella. On the side, the young ladies of the aristocratic families looked at each other. They couldn't take their gazes away from Beligaju's body. Hellion Vivian understood this kind of feeling. After all, a man with such a good figure like Beligaju was really too rare to see. Not to mention his broad shoulders and long legs, his temperament was outstanding. Especially when the rain hit his outer robe and black hair. He just reached out his hand and tucked the hair in front of his forehead behind his head. It was indescribably cold and untamed, with a never-before-seen wildness. It deeply broke the feeling of abstinence on his body, making people want to see more and more. Hellion Vivian snorted twice. This third prince, in order to find her, really lost a lot. This time he really sold his body thoroughly. If it wasn't for the wrong time, she would have definitely whistled twice at him. A person like this who could live so handsomely at any time must also have a certain level of skill. Eunuch Sun also noticed the gazes of the young ladies. He directly took off his outer robe, wanting to put it on his master. However, the royal family's movements were too fast, and his legs were too short. He simply couldn't keep up. Hellion Vivian was originally very happy to watch this play, but what she didn't expect was that Beligaju would suddenly turn his head and look in her direction. No, it should be said that he was looking in the direction of the manservants. Hellion Vivian's fingers paused. In her heart she fiercely said, "Third prince, you're really something. You won't even let a man go." However, Hellion Vivian raised her eyes and looked at the black clouds that were not far away. The corners of her mouth slowly curved up. Her thin lips slightly moved, as if she was counting down. 1 to 3. Following the sound of her 3, a flock of winged beasts flew over from the west with a whoosh. They were as black as layers upon layers of black clouds. Everyone was stunned, looking at this scene in disbelief. What's going on? It's a beast tide. Why is there a beast tide at this time? Didn't you say it would only be available in summer? You're asking me? How would I know? Quickly informed the dean. However, in the blink of an eye, the superior compound was in chaos. Actually, the winged beasts wouldn't really hurt people, but what they liked to do the most was to grab people from the ground and throw them down. In their minds, this was a way to express their friendliness. However, the students who fought with them only wanted to say, "Thank you, they really don't need this kind of friendliness." His legs were about to break. Holy shit, where are they going to take them? Miss, young master. Probably because they thought it wasn't chaotic enough, the screams of those servant girls could practically lift the roof of the entire superior compound. Hellion May was knocked until her head was dizzy. She held onto her long skirt, afraid that she would fall. In the entire superior compound that was boiling with noise, perhaps only the royal was the calmest. His long sleeves weren't stained with any dust as he stood in the middle of that group of winged beasts. His figure didn't change in the slightest, but that pair of phoenix eyes looked even more dangerous and bright than before. All of the winged beasts didn't dare to grab him. With great difficulty, there was a winged beast that extended its claws, wanting to play with the royal. The royal glanced over, and that winged beast immediately howled and obediently retracted its claws. It was so scared that it almost fell from the sky. Hellion Vivian watched from the side with some admiration. He deserved to be called the royal. Not only did he eat both men and women, he could even handle a divine beast. Hellion Vivian. A man's special deep voice suddenly sounded. It seemed to carry an unprecedented patience, and it was exceptionally pleasing to the ears. Hellion Vivian's arms stiffened. She thought that Beligaju had discovered her. However, her years of reason told her that by all means she shouldn't turn around. Maybe it was a trap. As it turned out, it really was a trap. Beligaju saw that he couldn't trick that little fox out like this. The tip of his tongue streaked across his thin lips, and an exceptionally bewitching smile slowly blossomed from the corners of his mouth. It was like a spider lily that bloomed in hell, carrying a soul-stirring bewitchment and an incomparably sexy deep voice. He paused between each word. "You really want this highness to personally take action and capture you back, Ichem?" That of his was still very tasteful. It didn't sound like he was trying to capture someone, but rather like he was playing a game of hide and seek. Hellion Vivian smiled. Her 2 arms had already been pulled up into the air by the winged beasts. Her posture was more handsome and free than anyone else's. She didn't struggle like the others, but rather, She was waiting for this kind of opportunity. If you come back on your own, this highness can consider whether or not to let you go. Beligaju's figure under the moonlight appeared even more celestial. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. She said in her heart, "Third prince, you're looking down on me, Hellion Vivian, too much. You should leave that face of yours to deceive little girls." However, AI, listening to that kind of voice, she really did want to make a move. But she didn't believe that he would let her go. He wasted so much energy looking for her, just to let her go? She didn't believe it. According to the royal's personality, after he caught her, he would definitely dismember her into 10,000 pieces. Oh no, perhaps even the royal wouldn't disdain dismembering her into 10,000 pieces. He would just throw her to the ground, and then send a few people to remove her legs and claws. He would even sit on the side and drink tea without blinking. After being together for a few days, she understood this man's methods too well. He was elegant but ruthless to the point of wanting a person's life. Let's go. Hellion Vivian finally made a decision. Using the wind brought by the winged beasts, she successfully hid in that group of servants, young masters, and young ladies who were captured. The people standing below tried every possible method to bring down the winged beasts, but there were too many of them. Even if they each dealt with one, they couldn't handle it all. What the hell was going on? White Academy unexpectedly had so many winged beasts flying over on such a rainy day. It was too strange. Everyone had their own thoughts in their hearts, and they couldn't be blamed for thinking this way because there was an agreement between the Academy and the beast horde. The Academy's people wouldn't go to Spirit Forest to wantonly hunt spirit beasts, and the spirit beasts also couldn't casually attack Academy students. Right now, this group of winged beasts, you said they were attacking, right? It also didn't seem like it. But what the hell was the meaning of bringing them high up into the sky? Beligaju looked at the gradually ascending horde of beasts. That pair of deep and narrow eyes were cold to the extreme. Even his voice was like a flower that bloomed in the North Pole. Each word was ice cold. It seems that you don't plan on coming back. That's not up to you. When Hellion Vivian heard these words of his, her breathing stopped, and even her heart lightly trembled. Chapter 102. Little White is in front. Yuan Ming's lazy voice sounded in her ear. Hellion Vivian concentrated her energy, her eyes looking forward, thinking about where to land in a moment. Unfortunately, the third prince wouldn't let her go. His voice didn't have the slightest bit of warmth. "This is the last time, come back by yourself, and I will treat it as if nothing happened." Hellion Vivian didn't know why, but when she heard these words, she unexpectedly felt that there was a faint hurt in that demonically cold voice. Hurt? How could it be? Hellion Vivian thought that the other side must be tired. She was also tired. From the beginning of their escape until now, they had changed no less than 3 identities. Each identity tested her ability to adapt on the spot. Moreover, the confrontation with the third prince was more exhausting than any other mission she had undertaken. Adding on this body, her physical strength simply couldn't keep up. Therefore, the current her only wanted to quickly get out. Hellion Vivian clenched her teeth and continued to use the winged beast's strength to fly out. Her arms couldn't bend, because once there was an abnormality, the winged beast would leave her behind. Then all of her plans would be in vain. Beligaju seemed to have used up all of his patience. His long and narrow eyes slowly narrowed, and his long ink-black hair fiercely blossomed with his movements. It was like the darkness wandering in the world, as if he was summoning something. Finally, the wind stopped and the clouds surged. Behind him appeared a cloud that seemed to be dyed with blood. All of the shadows stopped the movements of their hands. Even Eunuch Sun opened his mouth wide in surprise, reaching out to cover his chest. What is that? There is something in the clouds? Fire Qilin. It was unknown who shouted this sentence. The entire academy boiled over, especially those students who yearned for the mythological beast in their dreams. One after another, they opened their eyes wide, staring unblinkingly at this heavenly scene. Some people said that the fire on the Fire Qilin's body could destroy all evil creatures in hell. Demons and monsters, none of them dared to approach. Burning on the banks of Wangchuan Lake, never extinguishing for 3 lifetimes. This was the power of an ancient mythological beast. No one could stop it. Only, how could it appear here? Everyone knew that it wasn't an easy matter to see the fire Qilin. It was the most difficult divine beast to tame in the world. No one had ever been able to make it truly submit. Even the former third prince had been abandoned by it without hesitation. It was cold and mysterious, and would only occasionally appear in the spirit forest. It would never come to the academy. Could it be? Was it because of the beast tide? That must be it. Although the third prince had once made a contract with the fire Qilin, the previous contract did not mean anything. Especially when the fire Qilin came out, the first one it attacked was the third prince. If the fire Qilin listened to his orders, it wouldn't appear in the air like this right now. Instead, it should be standing next to the third prince. The students looked at the sudden burst of flames under their feet, and felt that things were beyond their imagination. Only Eunuch Sun's eyelids twitched twice. He looked at his master with a meaningful gaze. The man slowly turned the black jade thumb ring on his finger. His thin lips moved slightly, like a king walking out of the flames. Eunuch Sun's heart thumped. His Highness When Beligaju gave the order, he did not forget to turn his head and look at Eunuch Sunday. It was that look that made Eunuch Sun completely shut up. He swallowed all the secrets back into his throat, but his heart was unable to suppress his excitement. Couldn't be wrong. His Highness was commanding the fire Qilin. But in order to not let others see, the fire Qilin attacked its master first when it came out. In fact, the fire Qilin that was flying in the air and spitting out flames was also feeling very stifled. From the moment it was summoned, its heart was filled with excitement. But its master actually wanted it to spit fire at him first? This was simply a test of a divine beast's loyalty. It originally wanted to be mighty and unyielding, but it really could not resist its master's cold gaze. It could only show its might and scare those humans. Now that it saw those little guys running around and shouting, it only wanted to blow bubbles out of boredom. What did its master summon it for? Was it for fun? Not likely. Its master's thoughts had never been so simple. The fire Qilin looked at Beligaju with hidden bitterness. However, Bailey Jiaju acted as if he didn't even recognize it. He calmly and unhurriedly avoided the fire at his side. After that, he stood behind the imperial bodyguards with an expression of, "I'm very weak, quickly come and protect me." When the fire Qilin saw this, the corner of its mouth fiercely twitched. It heard the order that came from the stream of consciousness. There was not the slightest ripple. There was only an indifference that made people submit. Have all those winged beasts come back immediately. The fire Qilin listened to that domineering and cold voice, and then looked at Beligaju's figure standing in the corner. It let out a long sigh. It was really too uncoordinated. It was really too much of an act. If you're too slow, this lord will break your wings. It was still a tone without any warmth, but the fire Qilin's entire body was stiff. Listen, this is the master of my house. Stupid humans, the prince in front of you who needs your protection is a fake. A fake. No longer daring to silently criticize its master, the fire Qilin quickly got up and swept towards the west. It was a grand ancient mythological beast. When had it not been awe-inspiring and aloof like a god? When those little mythological beasts greeted it, it never paid them any attention. Its chin was slightly raised, crushing the hearts of those little mythological beasts. After all, a king should have the demeanor of a king. But now it was unexpectedly like an eagle catching chicks, scaring those winged beasts back one by one. However, it was already used to it. Compared to its master who made it eat lettuce and didn't allow it to protest, this kind of life was too happy. Fuck. Boss. I finally saw the legendary boss. After the winged beasts saw the fire Qilin, their wings flew even faster. It was enough to see how excited they were. If a comparison had to be made, it was equivalent to seeing a living idol. Boss, how did you appear here? The fire Qilin really didn't want to say that it only came out to scare them. It could only pretend to be profound and make an end sound. The winged beasts were even more excited. Boss, can I shake hands with you? Helly and Vivian simply couldn't listen anymore. What kind of situation was this? Even a celebrity meet and greet wasn't this exaggerated, okay? Even if the fire Qilin was relatively handsome, it was still a beast. There was no end to beast love. You guys have to be a bit more rational, hey? What made Hellion Vivian feel gratified was that fortunately, the winged beast that caught her was more reliable. Hellion Vivian lifted her eyes and was just about to praise that little winged beast a few words. But she saw that it was completely red. Its two eyes emitted red hearts as it foolishly looked at the fire Qilin. It was incomparably bashful. I also want to go over. Hellion Vivian. Chapter 103. Boss, that's boss. The little winged beast's tone was becoming more and more girlish, even lowering its head to ask Hellion Vivian, "Don't you think boss is very handsome? Those sky-piercing horns, those twinkling scales, and his beautiful red hair. Everyone says that when he transforms into human form, he's even more handsome." Hellion Vivian pulled back her lips and smiled apologetically. "I really can't understand what kind of aesthetic view you have." "No problem, you humans generally don't have good eyesight." The little winged beast shrugged its shoulders and simply stopped its movements. Hellion Vivian chuckled twice and helplessly said, "Should I say thank you?" "No need, I can understand." The little winged beast's eyes flashed, and in a flash it turned its head. Hey, you can't fly back." Hellion Vivian's arm was still being held by the winged beast, and she was caught unprepared by the sudden situation. Fuck. What did that fire Qilin come out for? Was it really good to sell one's looks like this? "Woman, in a little while we're going to fly back." Yuan Ming curled his thin lips in interest. "If I were you, I would think carefully about how to face that third prince's anger." Hellion Vivian didn't say anything, but her increasingly tight eyes revealed her current situation. On the left was the cliff and on the right was White Academy. According to the winged beast's current flying method, just as Yuan Ming said, in less than a minute, she would be directly surrounded by the third prince's imperial bodyguards. The distance was getting closer and closer, so close that she was already able to see that man's cold and lonely back. This won't do, she must make a decision quickly. Hellion Vivian looked at the forested mountain peak. Her left hand suddenly exerted force, and her body quickly rotated. In a flash, she escaped from that servant's coat and quickly descended from the sky. She could still hear Yuan Ming's arrogant roar in her ear. "Woman, you're crazy. You'll die if you fall like this. You can't become a demon if you're not crazy." As Hellion Vivian replied to Yuan Ming's words, she didn't forget to throw out the armaments that she had brought along with her. One after another, she stacked them on top of each other and fastened them to the cliff wall in order to reduce the feeling of falling. The white cat also fainted. If it wasn't for the fact that its magical power hadn't recovered yet, it could directly become bigger and carry Hellion Vivian. Most importantly, it was still in the heavenly tribulation stage. It couldn't even protect itself, let alone carry Hellion Vivian. The wind was too strong. It could only hold on tightly to Hellion Vivian's shoulder, not daring to let go. Between the armament cultivator and the stone wall, there was a swish of flames. The white cat took a deep breath and didn't dare to exhale. Hellion Vivian only felt numbness in her left hand and pain in her right hand. All the cells in her body were subconsciously planning how to stop this torture. Shwa! With the last sound, Hellion Vivian swelled up all the internal energy in her body. The surrounding air changed and slowly formed a whirlwind, dragging her whole body up. Hellion Vivian used the wind to beautifully and handsomely flip sideways in the air. Then she beautifully stood still and avoided the incoming broken tree. That was close. Even if it was the devil's emissary Yuan Ming, he couldn't help but break out in cold sweat because of Hellion Vivian's bold action. Hellion Vivian only shook her numb hand and slightly curved her thin lips. "Beautiful escape? I'm afraid there's still one more obstacle." The white cat looked at the huge figure that appeared in front of it. A trace of cold light flashed through its amber eyes. Hellion Vivian also felt the danger. She turned her head and met the huge figure's eyes. Her eyelids jumped. "Demonic beast? As long as it's not a fire Qilin." The white cat arrogantly jumped onto Hellion Vivian's shoulder. "Go destroy it." Hellion Vivian chuckled twice. Who is the human and who is the beast? However, that demonic beast didn't give her a chance to complain. It was extremely hungry and had already gone berserk. When it smelled the smell of meat, it only wanted to eat a good meal. But what it didn't know was that Hellion Vivian also wanted to go berserk. This was the first time she was forced to go berserk. She needed to vent. Shwa. Hellion Vivian directly used the wind to rise up. Like a sharp knife, she hung in the air and directly grabbed the demonic beast's throat. That demonic beast glanced at her, as if mocking her for overestimating herself. It wanted to open its bloody mouth and swallow her whole. That demonic beast seemed to be a master that bullied the weak and feared the weak. Seeing that her left hand was inconvenient, it directly bit towards her left hand. Its attack was also concentrated on Hellion Vivian's left hand. Seeing that it was about to pounce over, Hellion Vivian clenched her teeth. Her true power surged, and her 2 fingers closed together on its neck. She exerted strength and a white light shot out. However, it wasn't as loose and soft as before. Like a swift and fierce blade, it brought along a cold light as it all surged into that demonic beast's throat. That demonic beast first paused. It was in severe pain as if it was being pulled back and forth by the wind coming from all directions. However, in a flash it was pulled by the wind and lost all of its strength. Roar! The demonic beast raised its head and roared. Its volume was extremely loud, and its body shook like a sieve. It actually seemed to be in great pain. That huge body loudly fell to the ground, crushing countless shrubs. Dust flew up and moonlight poured down. In the empty space, only the incomparably handsome backs of a human and a cat remained on the other side. All of the winged beasts had stopped in the courtyard of the superior compound. They were well behaved, as if they had been tamed by someone, and lazily extended their claws. Basically, those young ladies and young masters who had been captured had all safely returned. As soon as they touched the ground, they put on their cloaks and cut a sorry figure. However, Hellion Vivian wasn't among these people. Eunuch's son somewhat didn't dare to look at His Highness' expression. He only swallowed his saliva and looked at the servant's outer garment hanging on the winged beast's claw. He didn't need to think to know who had just worn it. The rain had already stopped, and the black clouds had completely dispersed. Beligaju calmly stood there. His long sleeves floated in the air, 1,000 threads as black as ink, and his silver mask drew an icy light. After a long time he finally said, "She's still alive. I will find her and bring her back." Finished speaking, he indifferently turned around. His whole body surged with a fierce aura that overflowed to the heavens. His white robe and ink-black hair were sent flying towards the sky. His demon-like figure was dripping with raindrops, and people couldn't help but look again and again. The fire Qilin was hidden in the fantasy space. Its voice was heavy as it opened its mouth. "Master, she's the Phoenix girl." "So what?" The tip of Beligaju's tongue slowly slid past the wound on his thin lips. His devilishly cold and evil aura was unintentionally exposed. "As long as someone provokes me, I won't easily let them go, no matter who they are." The fire Qilin had never seen its master reveal such an expression. Several hundred years or even 1,000 years. Master had always treated everything as a game. It wasn't that he hadn't shown interest in other things before, but that kind of interest was too weak and too brief. It was as big as this time. It was simply too little, too little. Chapter 104. Pass down the order. Not paying attention to the fire Qilin's thoughts, Beligaju lowered his eyes and tightened his grip on the outer garment in his hand. All the Imperial bodyguards are to stop searching and withdraw the checkpoint at the foot of the mountain. Shadow stared blankly and asked in disbelief. All withdrawn. His Highness just now looked like he wouldn't give up until he caught Miss Hellion. How could he suddenly be soft-hearted? The next second, Shadow discovered that he was wrong. Because His Highness wasn't soft-hearted at all. Instead, he changed to an even more ruthless method. Place shadows everywhere under the walls outside the city. Pull up a fishing net and don't release arrows. This Highness wants to catch her alive. His voice was very low, but it had an unquestionable decisiveness. Although Shadow was too worried about this kind of His Highness and whether or not his movements would be too big and attract the attention of the 4 great clans, he clearly understood that His Highness never feared the 4 great clans. Watch the city gates. If there are old people, pregnant women, and some people with inconvenient movements who want to leave the city, check carefully. In addition, send people to follow Heizei. Beligaju once again slowly raised his thin lips. His voice was so slow that it made people's ears numb. As long as someone approaches him, catch them for me. Not knowing why, when Shadow heard this sentence, he instinctively prayed for that woman. He thought that if Miss Hellion was smart enough, she wouldn't go find the Hay family's young master. Because His Highness recently saw the Hay family as if he didn't like them. In the wee hours of the morning, Hellion Vivian walked out of the forest in a sorry state. She took a long breath and then began to seriously size herself up. She raised her head and sighed, "I'm so handsome." "Are you talking about the stinky mud all over your body?" The white cat disdainfully jumped to the side. "You're still in the mood to make fun of yourself. Looks like you haven't been driven crazy by the third prince. He's indeed shrewd to the point of not being human." Hellion Vivian laughed. "It's just that I have rough skin and thick flesh. If it were someone else, they would have long been broken down by him. You say, I just didn't agree to cooperate with him to anger the retired emperor. Is there a need for him to send so many people to surround me in the courtyard?" Although she really shouldn't have joined hands with the empress to scheme against him. However, the third prince shouldn't be that ruthless. Could it be that the second generation of the royal family had a stronger desire to control? Couldn't stand others going against him? Hellion Vivian couldn't figure it out, so she stopped thinking about it. Yuan Ming rubbed his chin, his eyes flashing with a light. Everything was obviously very successful. Why would the ancient divine beast Fire Qilin appear there? Purely wanting to come out and take a stroll? No matter how he thought about it, it was impossible. Not only was Yuan Ming puzzled, even Hellion Vivian was wary of the Fire Qilin's appearance. Someone wants to tame him. The white cat's cold voice temporarily dispelled their suspicions. During this period of time, people from the White Academy have entered the spirit forest in order to find it, or perhaps to force it out. Yuan Ming smiled evilly. The Fire Qilin is not that easy to tame. That's right. The white cat turned its head and looked at the road behind it. That's why those people returned again and again without success. I think they probably angered the Fire Qilin, so it burned the White Academy. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Then this is too much of a coincidence. It didn't burn anywhere, only the superior compound? Because the person who wants to tame it lives in the superior compound. The white cat lifted its head and looked deeply at Wei Wei. It's that Murong Prince's manners heir, Murong Changfeng. When Yuan Ming heard this name, he also subconsciously looked towards Hellion Vivian and lightly coughed twice. Hellion Vivian didn't hold back and hooked her lips. Why didn't you burn him to death? This trash of a man who can't accomplish anything but spoils everything. Hellion Vivian, who had no way of knowing the truth, had already put all the blame on Murong Changfeng. From the bottom of her heart, she firmly believed that if it wasn't for Murong Changfeng wanting to tame the Fire Qilin, the Fire Qilin wouldn't have suddenly appeared at the superior compound, ruining her entire plan. Then she should have already been taken out of the city by the winged beast, and wouldn't be in this predicament like now. It's still more practical to plan how to get out of the city. With her skill, climbing over the city walls wasn't a problem. However, the smart royal family wouldn't have people lying in ambush around the city walls. Once she made a move, she wouldn't know if she'd fall into a trap. It seemed that going out through the city gates was still a bit safer. However, she didn't have a divine beast by her side. If she let Little White go back and summon one, she would inevitably have to go through the White Academy. At that time, maybe the third prince would follow the vine to the melon and follow the divine beast to find her. It seemed that she couldn't count on the divine beast. Hellion Vivian knew that if there was even the slightest possibility, she shouldn't make the third prince an enemy. Too tiring. Forget it, the most important thing now was to change her appearance. With her appearance, she'd be recognized in minutes if she walked out. First of all, she had to disguise herself. Hellion Vivian looked at the reflection of her face in the lake water. Disguising herself wasn't difficult for her. But if she wanted to disguise herself without leaving any traces, she had to find an identity suitable for herself. She was always a reporter, and her opponent was the third prince. Therefore, she couldn't have the slightest bit of carelessness. Originally, Hellion Vivian had already disguised herself as a pregnant woman, but after looking left and right, her heart faintly felt that it wasn't too safe. Wouldn't it be better to show her true appearance? The corners of Hellion Vivian's mouth slowly pulled up into a light smile. She increasingly felt that this idea wasn't bad. Her face was too dark and the target was too big. If she restored her appearance, It would become the most natural protective color. Because everyone knew that the capital's #1 hedonistic young lady was really ugly. Who would have thought that there would be a day when she would be astonishingly beautiful? Hellion Vivian stood up and used the remaining time to spread all the strawberries that she had picked from the paradise space on her face. Those black things magically fell off her face, and her white skin was like egg white that had just broken out of its shell, sparkling and translucent. Under the illumination of the moonlight, it even emitted a faint glow. Her tall and exquisite nose bridge, her pink lips, and those bright eyes that were as bright as the moon. Every part of her was perfect. Her face was dainty, and her temperament was refined. She was like a fairy that had descended from the heavens. That small white face carried a faint coldness and arrogance, as if it was because of this that she appeared even more mysterious and enchanting. If it was said that Hellion Jiaoer's beauty made men want to hold her in their hearts and love her dearly, Hellion Vivian's beauty was soul-stirring and soul-stirring. She could be as light as a young girl, but she could also be as indifferent as a queen. Who was the real #1 beauty in the capital? Just by looking at Hellion Vivian's face, people's hearts would naturally be able to discern. However, just as Hellion Vivian had said, no one would have thought that such a woman would be the capital's famous waste young lady. Chapter 105. Early in the morning, in the capital of the city, the peddlers always came out earlier than the pedestrians. The old lady bent over, carrying steaming hot tofu pudding. A bowl only sold for half a copper, so cheap and delicious that it made people click their tongue. There were many people leaving the city in a day, so the area near the city gate was always much more lively than other places. Hellion Vivian didn't wear conspicuous clothes. Standing in the crowd, perhaps no one could recognize her. If she didn't raise her head, no one would give her a second glance. She was like a normal person leaving the city. First, she sat at the old lady's place, asked for a bowl of tofu pudding, and listened to the news all around. Did you guys know, the third prince seems to be catching someone? Catching someone? Catching who? I heard it's the Hellion family's young lady who lost her martial chi. Why does His Highness want to catch her? It shouldn't be that she did something wrong, and angered His Highness. Who knows, but later on, the third prince again withdrew his people, saying that he won't catch her. He probably feels that it's a waste of time, and that it's not worth taking a woman seriously. Won't catch her? Hellion Vivian's hand that was eating the tofu pudding paused, and the light in her eyes flashed. Carefully thinking about it, the third prince really should have stopped. With such great fanfare, he ordered a search of every courtyard in the White Academy, and even the superior compound. He didn't let those aristocratic young ladies and young masters get drenched in the rain for an entire night. The four great clans would certainly have opinions about him. After all, they all loved their own family's children. Even if no one called those aristocratic young ladies out to watch, if it weren't for the third prince, they wouldn't have encountered the beast tide. No matter how much the retired emperor doted on the third prince, he still wouldn't allow that man to act recklessly. Or maybe it was really like what everyone said. The third prince suddenly realized that using so much effort on a good-for-nothing young lady like her, it simply wasn't worth it? Hellion Vivian laughed mockingly, but didn't change her original plan. Even if the third prince really didn't plan to catch her, she still couldn't relax her vigilance. What if, right now, everything was a facade that man deliberately created in order to make her lose her guard? Wouldn't she be in trouble then? A trace of shrewdness flashed through the depths of Hellion Vivian's eyes. She held the spoon in her mouth and finished the last mouthful of tofu pudding. It was as if she hadn't heard the conversation just now. However, when she passed by, everyone couldn't help but hold their breaths. Aside from amazement in their eyes, there was nothing else. Even when the tofu pudding in their hands spilled, they didn't feel anything. Fairy. I see a fairy. Thus on this day the capital was in an uproar. Many people said that they had seen a fairy who was even more beautiful than the #1 beauty in the capital, Hellion Jiaoer. That temperament, that appearance, that figure, even though she was wearing coarse cloth, it was difficult to conceal that elegance and refinement. The shadows who were lying in ambush in the city did not have the leisure to care about what kind of fairy appeared in the capital. What they wanted to find the most was an ugly woman. Especially ugly dark-skinned women. Therefore, this matter was not reported to Beligaju. However, the Hellion Jiaoer, who was out on business, heard the news as soon as she arrived in the city. The servant girl who followed by her side curled her thin lips in disdain. A village girl dares to compare with our miss, how ridiculous. The Hellion Jiaoer smiled. It was a very subtle feeling. Don't pay attention to it. Let them speak. Jiaoer is right. Paying attention to these things will only make you lower yourself. Hellion Guangyao laughed heartily, gratified. He walked out from the inn behind them. The Hellion Jiaoer turned her head and called, "Father?" Hellion Guangyao nodded. "I called you out this time because I received a piece of news. This news will be of great help to you in the martial chi competition." "What news?" The Hellion Jiaoer's eyes lit up. Hellion Guangyao mysteriously curved his lips. "The armament convention is about to begin. There's an armament there that was personally made by young Master Wu Shuang. It's very suitable for women to use. If you can obtain that armament and match it with the martial chi in your body, you'll definitely be able to win the championship in the martial chi competition." Armament. The more Hellion Jiaoer listened, the brighter her pair of eyes became. As far as every martial artist was concerned, obtaining an armament that was suitable for them was simply more important than anything else. She had already advanced in rank. If she also possessed an astonishing armament, retired emperor would definitely have a whole new level of respect for her. Even that high and mighty person had always liked outstanding women. Hellion Guangyao looked at his beloved daughter's expression and knew that she already had her own thoughts in her heart. He didn't say much and directly said, "Father has already helped you apply for leave from the academy. In a moment when you go back, properly pack up and go out with the air. He has mastered Tu Lao's invitation and can bring you to the armament convention. Father has also already made arrangements with the person in charge over there. When you go, they'll make things convenient for you." The Hellion Jiaoer wasn't very stupid. After listening, she asked in return, "Father, rather than spending so much effort to arrange these things, why didn't you directly talk to young Master Wu Shuang about the matter related to me? You think I didn't say anything?" Hellion Guangyao heaved a long sigh. Young Master Wu Shuang was born in an aristocratic family of martial artists. You also know that all the martial artists in the world, no matter how powerful they are, have no choice but to admit that the armaments made by young Master Wu Shuang are simply impossible for them to replicate. In addition, his father is the chairman of the armament convention. This kind of person never shows himself easily, but he also won't refuse anyone. Young Master Wu Shuang actually received father's invitation, and also wrote a reply letter to father. However, the letter was merely a few polite words. The general meaning was that he wanted that armament to choose his own master. He really doesn't listen to reason or force, ah. The Hellion Jiaoer gracefully smiled. The corners of her mouth carried complacency. "Father, you don't need to worry. When the time comes, Jiaoer will naturally make young Master Wu Shuang see me in a new light. Since you have this kind of ambition, father can be at ease." Hellion Guangyao happily patted her shoulder and instructed the servants by his side. "Take good care of Mississippi. You're not allowed to make the slightest mistake." "Yes." The servants lowered their eyes and had an appearance of respect and reverence. Hellion Jiaoer's personal maid supported Hellion Jiaoer by the arm as she turned around. At the same time she said, "This servant heard that young Master Wu Shuang is actually a handsome man. It's said that in this capital, apart from the royal family, there's no one who can be more handsome than him. It's a pity that his body isn't good. Since childhood, he's been raised in the residence. Ordinarily, he'll only come out when there's an auction for armaments. His entire body emits the aura of an immortal." "Oh, you usually only know how to inquire about this." The Hellion Jiaoer didn't even turn her head. Her walking posture was indescribably arrogant. That personal maidservant knew that her mistress had not been in a good mood recently. She was afraid that she would say something wrong and get her arm pinched again. She cleverly changed the topic and said, "This servant heard this because it has something to do with Mississippi." Chapter 106. "Oh, what does that have to do with me?" Hellion Jiaoer sneered, obviously not having a good temper. Her personal maid shrank her neck and forced a smile. That young Master Wuxia likes music and rarely praises others. That day in the martial arts training, someone mentioned that Mrs. Qin's skills were excellent. He also said a few words, and every word he said was full of praise for Mississippi. As the maid spoke, she raised her eyes to look at Helian Jiaoer's face. Seeing that the corner of her mouth finally had a smile, she spoke more enthusiastically. It can be seen that young Master Wuxia has been paying attention to Miss for a long time. It's just that he didn't have the opportunity to meet you. After Helian Jiaoer heard this, she used a handkerchief to cover up the smile that repeatedly rose on her vermilion lips. Her voice, however, didn't change, and her expression was indifferent. "Okay, I got it. You can't tell these things to other people, so as to avoid provoking any more trouble. This servant understands." The maidservant bowed and turned around to wipe off the cold sweat on her forehead. Helian Vivian was standing in front of them, looking at the wooden comb that the peddler had placed outside. It was completely unexpected that she would meet Helian Jiaoer and Helian Guangyao. Her first reaction was to lower her head and look at the headwear, pretending to be a passerby. After listening to the useful information, she took the things she wanted to buy and casually threw a tael of silver to the peddler. When they brushed past each other, it was hard not to notice her face. Helian Jiaoer seemed to be stunned for a moment, probably because she had never seen someone more beautiful than herself. Her first reaction was to turn around and take a second look. However, she only had time to see the back of that woman. She was dressed in coarse cloth and emitted a disdainful smell of poverty from head to toe. She was just an ordinary commoner. Helian Jiaoer disdainfully thought. Just as she was about to turn her head around, she saw that the people around her, one after another, sucked in a breath of air. Their gazes were far away, not even the slightest bit fell on her body. Even her personal servant girl also had a dumbstruck appearance. This made Helian Jiaoer's anger burst out. She reached out and pressed on the maid's arm, her sharp red nails piercing into it. "That person just now was very beautiful?" Only then did the maidservant realize what mistake she had made, and the blood drained from her face in an instant. Her miss hated it when someone was more beautiful than her. She could not show the slightest trace of amazement in front of Miss. Therefore that maid immediately shook her head and endured the pain. "She is beautiful, but compared to Miss, she is just a lump of mud under your feet. She has no temperament at all." "You sure know how to talk." Helian Jiaoer let go of her hand and looked back. Her voice was cold. "With that kind of clothing, she dares to be mentioned in the same breath as this Mississippi. What a joke." Hearing this, the maid quickly echoed. Yes, Mrs. Right. She is not even fit to carry Mrs. Shoes." "All right, I'm tired of your flattery." Helian Jiaoer's tone was chilly as she blew on her fingertips. The light in her eyes dimmed. "Let's return to the academy first. Before we leave, I need to think of a way to make that slut never return to the academy again." She did not know where Helian Vivian had gone, but she could make her leave and never come back. Helian Jiaoer chuckled and lowered her head. The poison in her eyes was more terrifying than ever. But who was that woman who had just walked past? How could a village girl have such white and translucent skin? Every time it was the beginning of summer, what she spent the most effort on was how to prevent herself from being sunburned. She used the best pearl powder and sandalwood to maintain her current appearance. But that village girl clearly looked even more. Helian Jiaoer gripped the handkerchief in her hand. Then she sneered in her heart. Even if her appearance was outstanding, she still had a poor family background. Even if she got married, she would still be nothing more than a concubine. Thinking like this, Helian Jiaoer's heart calmed down. That small face the size of a palm recovered its previous dainty beauty. Wearing a veil on her face, she was finally supported into the sedan chair by the maid. However, she did not know that the person she wanted to frame was the village girl, who had just passed by her. "This is great. That younger sister of yours is also going to participate in the armament convention. I don't know what kind of underhanded tricks she'll play when the time comes." Yuan Ming's voice was always filled with the meaning of watching a good show. It was probably related to his identity. The devil's emissary originally liked to create some chaos. Not to mention this kind of delicious food, delivered to his doorstep. He liked it even more. White Cat had always had a cold appearance. It seemed to be contemplating as it looked at the crowd not far away. Its voice was indifferent. Wei Wei, you can't let that woman obtain that armament. Yuan Ming lazily glanced at it. It's only an armament. You don't understand. White Cat proudly lifted its chin. That's not an ordinary armament. When I was in the spirit forest, I heard my father and mother say that the best armament materials in the divine continent should be found in the spirit forest. However, many years ago, these materials were secretly moved to a place. That place is precisely young Master Wushuang's birthplace, Yang City. Generally speaking, armament materials that haven't been formed will release a kind of mysterious magnetic force. This is also the reason why armaments are different from ordinary weapons. It doesn't matter to us divine beasts, but if humans come in contact with them for a long time, they will be injured to a certain extent. That young Master Wushuang's body isn't good. I reckon it's because he's been with these materials since childhood. The armament he's making right now is probably his final work. Can be said to be perfect within perfection. Not only are the materials used, but even its appearance and performance is a top-notch divine weapon in the entire divine continent. The person who possesses it will have the magical power to split open mountains and rivers. After Yuan Ming heard this, that devilishly charming handsome face also started to ponder. Hellion Vivian only smiled, neither servile nor overbearing. This armament and the wings of the night god I made last time, which one is more powerful? White Cat stared blankly and said, they're equally matched. Pausing for a moment, it once again added a sentence. You've already given away the wings of the night god. There's no meaning in comparing. I only want to know, between me and that young Master Wushuang, who is more powerful? Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. Her long and narrow eyes carried a trace of light. I won't allow anyone to steal my business at the armament convention. White Cat's mouth twitched. In the end, you're still doing it for the money. Of course it's for the money. Hellion Vivian looked at White Cat with an expression that was even more innocent than White Cat's. She sighed. If it weren't for the money, would I need to be so bitterly hiding? Refusing to be tempted by the third prince's beauty also requires courage. White Cat. Chapter 107. Where are we going next? Out of the city? Yuan Ming pulled the topic back. Hellion Vivian thought for a while and shook her head. We can't just leave the city like this. Why can't we? Didn't you say that once you recover your original appearance you won't be recognized? Yuan Ming raised his eyebrows. Hellion Vivian touched her chin. Indeed, I won't be recognized, but the attention will be too great, unless someone goes out with me. You mean we should go find the second young master of the He family? The White Cat lazily stretched its body. Then let's go quickly, this lord is hungry. Hellion Vivian nodded, and the step that she had just taken she retracted it. Do you guys think that with the royal family's temperament, they will let me go so easily? The White Cat and Yuan Ming looked at each other, turned their heads in unison and said, it's hard to say. I think he is very vengeful. Hellion Vivian tapped the wooden comb, but people also say that he is indifferent to everything, and the most important thing is that he even withdrew the guards in the city. Yuan Ming didn't participate in this kind of conversation, and only looked at Hellion Vivian with his arms crossed. The smile on the corner of his mouth didn't fade. The devil's emissary was different from the mythological beast. The latter was absolutely loyal, but the former enjoyed the contractor's absolute command more. If its master wasn't ruthless enough and firm enough, then its fighting strength would also decrease. Once its master wasn't confident enough, it could break free from the contract at any time and regain its freedom. At this time you should... The White Cat just opened its mouth. Hellion Vivian interrupted. At this time you should follow your own feelings. Then why did you analyze so much just now? The White Cat exploded. Hellion Vivian stroked it and continued to sigh. Be good, I am showing you my democratic side. But it turns out that I am not suitable for democracy, sigh. The White Cat. Enough, who can drag this woman down? Don't go to Haze. Hellion Vivian stood up straight, her beautiful face emitting a faint light under the morning light. We'll think of another way. Yuan Ming looked at the girl who was standing against the light and smiled evilly. Then he turned around and hid inside the ancient book. The White Cat frowned and jumped onto the young girl's shoulder. Its voice was cold. You don't believe that the third prince will let you go so easily? Do you know when humans usually choose to strike when they're hunting? Hellion Wei Wei glanced sideways at the white cat. When the prey is eating, because at that time they are most relaxed and unguarded. For this reason, hunters will always place food around the traps to create a comfortable atmosphere. As she spoke, she raised her head and chuckled. If the third prince wants to be the hunter, you have to ask me if I'm willing to be the prey. The fog dispersed, and the sky in the east was finally bright. When Shadow saw the figure sitting on the wooden chair, he stared blankly. Did His Highness not sleep all night? Hearing the noise, Beligaju, who was propping up his face with one hand, lazily raised his eyes. His ice-cold eyes were as clear as a demon's. His tone was as flat as indifferent as before. How is it? Reporting to your highness, no one has approached young Master He. Shadow respectfully lowered his eyes and reported without missing a word. But the strange thing is that young Master He's carriage never left the city. Instead, he stayed in an inn, as if he's waiting for someone. As Bailey Jiaju listened, his slender fingertips tapped on the tabletop. This seemed to be a common action when he was thinking. Within the elegance was a sense of self-restraint. No need to keep an eye on her, she won't go look for Heize again. No need again? Shadow was becoming more and more unable to figure out his own master's routine. However, for the sake of insurance, he still felt that he should raise an opinion. Perhaps it's not time yet. Could it be that Miss Hellion is waiting for us to withdraw our troops? After all, she had played this trick before, creating a diversion to the east and attacking the west. She won't. Beligaju pushed the teacup in his hand, his thin lips demonically cold. That little fox has never fought an uncertain battle. No matter how much bait is placed, as soon as she senses danger, her first reaction is to stay away. She didn't appear in Heize's surroundings all night. That means that she's already guessed a few things. For example, in this game, who was the hunter and who was the prey? But the prey he chose this time was especially disobedient. Beligaju slowly tightened his grip on the teacup, so tight that even the surrounding air cooled down. A few things. Shadow always felt that his master's words were a bit hard to fathom. Beligaju didn't explain much. He only continued to ask in an indifferent tone. Aside from Heize, did anything else happen in the city? Nothing else. It's just that a fairy appeared recently. She's even more beautiful than that number one woman. The more Shadow spoke, the softer his voice became because His Highness had always been uninterested in these things. Beligaju first sneered, then closed his eyes and planned to continue to rest. Shadow knew that this would be the result. He rubbed his nose and planned to leave, but then he saw Beligaju suddenly open his eyes. Those eyes were so bright that it was almost frightening. Fairy? No wonder she couldn't be found at any of the city gates. How could he forget that she originally had a layer of skin on her body? But this kind of feeling of letting other people spy on his prey really didn't make him happy. Shadow still didn't know what happened to His Highness. On the other side, Beligaju had already stood up with a smile that wasn't a smile. His long sleeves fluttered, bringing out a bone-piercing cold wind. Go prepare the carriage. Immediately enter the city. Yes, as a well-trained Shadow at any time, he would accept orders without a change in expression. Just like now, he didn't understand why His Highness suddenly decided to enter the city. Dispatch all the shadow guards. Beligaju's voice rang out again, colder than ever before. Unhurriedly, he paused between each word, as if he was grinding through his lips. Capture that girl who's as beautiful as a fairy. This time Shadow really stared blankly for a moment. His eyes blinked. What did His Highness mean? Not capturing that Miss Hellion, but capturing a fairy instead? Who could tell him what was going on? Hellion Vivian also wanted to know what was going on. Originally everything was fine. She was still planning whether or not to spend some money to hire a few maids to disguise herself out of the city. How did so many shadow guards suddenly appear? Specifically picking beautiful girls to make their move. It made her really think that she was a little mouse on the street. She hid here and there in a very sorry state. Woman, they're here. The white cat coldly stood on the high roof. From far away, it saw that carriage belonging to the imperial family. It lowered its head and met Hellion Vivian's gaze. Its eyes flashed with a never-before-seen worry. Chapter 108. On the main street, a carriage as tall as a person was slowly moving forward. Countless black-clothed cavalrymen were guarding the front and back of the carriage. Hellion Vivian turned around, her back against the wall. She made a hand gesture to the white cat, indicating that it should enter the fairyland space first. She leaned to the side and looked in the direction of the carriage. Her back was slightly shaken. It seems that this third prince really wanted to catch her. He actually came in person. What should we do now? Yuan Ming's eyes narrowed. He also felt that this third prince was very difficult to deal with. Hellion Vivian analyzed the situation. We can't meet force with force. Woman, do you know what this means? I can sense martial qi all around me. Yuan Ming raised his eyes, his tone cold. This means that we are surrounded. He knows that you are nearby. Let's retreat first. Wei Wei's fingers tightened. Her figure beautifully scuttled to another long alley. Yuan Ming looked at the similarly blocked long alley and whistled. It seems that we can't retreat. That man was really ruthless. He didn't even give them a chance to take a small path. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and raised her hand. She was just about to use her martial qi when she heard a suppressed cough. Uncle Liang, what happened outside? That voice was like water. It echoed in the noisy street, as if it could calm all the noise. Hellion Vivian's ears moved. She pulled Yuan Ming to the side and looked at the carriage that stopped at the entrance of the alley. Her eyes flashed with light. The carriage didn't look like much. It was pure white and clean. There weren't any unnecessary decorations. But this kind of carriage was commonly seen in the capital. Any merchant with a little money could afford it. Unlike that rich young master He Zhe. The roof of the carriage was painted with a luxurious golden color. However, what Hellion Vivian cared about was the handsome black horse that pulled the carriage. Although it tried very hard to restrain its wings, its owner also very attentively gave it a special saddle. But all of this couldn't fool Hellion Vivian's eyes. That horse wasn't an ordinary horse. It's a black wind horse. Even Yuan Ming, when he saw the carriage, had a faint look of astonishment on his face. According to reason, it should be hiding in the spirit forest, so how could it be willing to be driven by a human? Hellion Vivian's thin lips curled up as she looked at Yuan Ming with a devilish smile. In the blink of an eye, she was nowhere to be seen. In front of the carriage, a middle-aged servant jumped down from the shaft and bowed towards the curtain of the carriage. His kind face was full of respect. Young master, it's the Imperial Guards. They seem to be searching for someone. Guards of the royal family? A pair of hands that were excessively pale and thin reached out from the carriage with inexplicable strength. They held the curtain of the carriage, and the ivory white robe fluttered in the wind. A low cough sounded. Just respond politely, don't get into a fight. The middle-aged servant bowed his head and replied respectfully, yes, this old servant will take care of this small matter. Young master, please rest assured. Be careful. A voice that was as clear as water followed the fall of the carriage's curtain. The man turned his head around. Hellion Vivian, who was hiding in the carriage, finally had the chance to see his appearance. That picturesque face was covered with a layer of brilliance. His thin lips were pale due to years of illness, but it didn't affect his bearing. Instead, it added a trace of warmth. The smile on his face was just right. His long and narrow eyes were half-curved, and his eyebrows were like the cold moon. It was inconceivably good-looking. The pure white robe on his body was especially fitting, making him look as if he had just walked out from the moon. Hellion Vivian could clearly see that the man's calm eyes flashed with a luster. Sure, Hellion Vivian didn't care about the difference between men and women. Her left hand covered his mouth and smiled faintly. I personally don't like violence, so I asked this young master to cooperate. The man glanced at the dagger that was close to his neck. His expression didn't change as he gently said, the person that the third prince is looking for is you. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. She was surprised by this man's intelligence. At this time, the other carriage had already arrived. Even though it was separated by the curtain, Hellion Vivian could still feel a strong sense of oppression. Hellion Vivian tightened her grip on the dagger in her hand. She was planning to think of another way. That man opened his mouth. With a light cough, he only said 2 words, lie down. Hellion Vivian's eyes flashed. She looked deeply at that man and quickly bent her body. At this time, The curtain of the carriage was suddenly blown up by a cold wind. Hellion Vivian was nestled under the seat. She looked up under the sunlight. She saw that in the distance someone was walking over step by step. His steps seemed to have been calculated. It was as if he was walking on clouds. Every step repeated the same posture. He looked indifferent and cold, but there was a kind of unstoppable elegance. Hellion Vivian seemed to hear the sound of the carriage wheels cracking. The entire street seemed to be still. Almost everyone looked at this godlike man who was walking down from the carriage. Even their breaths were suppressed in their throats. Hellion Vivian subconsciously shrank her body, until the other person walked closer. So close that they were only separated by a thin layer of the carriage. He had the most noble temperament that Hellion Vivian had ever seen. In the light, he constantly seeped out a kind of provocative power. Hellion Vivian quickly held her breath. When Beligaju looked in this direction, his deep black eyes were indifferent to everything. It was as if even if the entire street went crazy because of him, it wouldn't affect his thoughts. Beligaju glanced inside the carriage. Then, his gaze fell on the man who was coughing lightly and smiling. That man didn't get off the carriage. He only bowed his head politely. He was as gentle as jade. "This commoner greets your highness, young master." Uncle Liang wanted to stand over, but he was fixed in the distance by the man's gaze. Beligaju's gaze didn't change at all. His tone was indifferent. "It's a routine matter." Hellion Wei Wei, who was lying on her stomach in the car, chuckled, her face ashen. "Routine business?" The third prince was indeed black-bellied to the point of death. It was clear that he had turned the world upside down in order to catch her, but when it came out of his mouth, it had become a serious matter of routine business. This made it so that even if the people of the four great clans wanted to complain to the retired emperor, they would not be able to obtain any benefits. "Let go." Beligaju's voice sounded again. Hellion Vivian swore that there was never a time like this where she felt that the third prince's voice was so pleasant to hear. But she just wanted to get up. Then she heard Beligaju say, "Wait a minute." Chapter 109. Hellion Vivian suddenly stiffened. She didn't have time to react. Fortunately, the man moved to the side and the corner of his white robe blocked her view. She gently coughed. "Your Highness, is there anything else?" Beligaju curved his thin lips. Even if he was questioning, he still gave people a kind of well-educated elegance. Not now. Not knowing why, Hellion Vivian secretly broke out in a cold sweat for her actions just now. This third prince, he wanted to trick her again. Fortunately, the sickly invalid's reaction was fast enough and his acting skills were good enough. Otherwise, ordinary people really wouldn't be able to deal with that man. Hellion Vivian breathed a sigh of relief and lay down on the ground. With one hand supporting her chin, she didn't care about her image at all. "Then this commoner will take his leave." The man reached out and put down the curtain. He lowered his head and looked at her. His voice was faint as he said to the outside of the carriage, "Uncle Liang, let's go." The city gates opened and the carriage wheels rolled over the ground inch by inch. Hellion Vivian heard a cry of alarm. "Your Highness!" It was Shadow. He extended his hand, wanting to support the dizzy Bailey Jiaju. However, she was stopped by Bailey Jiaju's gaze. "Your Highness!" Although it was only a touch, the warmth that came from his master's body already showed how bad his current condition was. However, none of them could see it. His Highness was so strong that he would never show a trace of weakness in front of others. Even now, he only used his finger to press his forehead. His long eyebrows slightly wrinkled, and his voice was cold as he ordered, "Continue to search." "But your body." The worry in Shadow's eyes was unintentional. Since that big fire, His Highness's body had a lot of problems. Each one of them was enough to take his life. However, Bailey Jiaju only leisurely turned his own ring. "I said, continue searching." "Yes." Shadow respectfully lowered his eyes. He raised his hand and led the rest of the shadow guards into the streets of the capital. When there was no one around, the fire Qilin opened its mouth from the fantasy space. "Master, you need to rest." That horse just now was a black wind horse. Beligaju's tone was indifferent, as if he was just stating a fact. The fire Qilin lowered its head. Nothing can escape Master's eyes. I didn't. Beligaju raised his head, and the light in his eyes dimmed a little. It's a little restless. It has sensed your presence. The fire Qilin jumped up. Master, your eyes. I can't see for the time being. Beligaju's voice was still lukewarm, as if the blind person wasn't him. The fire Qilin furrowed its thick eyebrows. Just like what it had said before, that fire had brought too much harm to its master. Master had also encountered such a situation before. The longest was 3 days, the shortest was 1 day. It was just that the time interval seemed to be getting shorter and shorter. He didn't know if this situation was good or bad. No matter what, the most important thing now was to not let anyone notice that something was wrong with Master Hellion Vivian, who was lying in the carriage, looked behind her. There was an unknown light in her eyes, as if there was something strange. If you regret it, you can get out of the carriage now. The man's voice was very gentle, but it revealed a hint of sickness. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Regret? She just felt that she had an unfair advantage. If it was the third prince under normal circumstances, he would have definitely discovered her hiding in the carriage. It seemed that sometimes good luck was the key to a decisive battle. Although her current body wasn't as good as the third prince's, Hellion Vivian leaned against the soft cushion, and her eyes were full of fatigue. Everyone wants to marry into the royal family. The man looked at her appearance, and his lips revealed a faint smile. His voice was low like flowing water, as if he was just stating a fact. His dark blue hair was like a brocade draped over his shoulders. Above his collar was a jade-like face that could topple all living things. His star-like eyebrows were like the first melting snow in spring. He was both happy and angry, and forcibly suppressed the light in the carriage. This kind of man made people feel that just looking at him would taint him, but they couldn't control themselves from wanting to get closer. Hellion Vivian sized up the white-clothed man in front of her again. She saw that he was sitting there indifferently, and had a lonely temperament. It was as if he didn't do anything and a cool breeze would come by. It wasn't that Hellion Vivian had never met this kind of person. On the surface he looked very weak, but in reality, he had the ability to reverse the universe. In the Dragon War Empire, he was the only one who fit this image. It was him, the second-ranked Lianqing family, Gongzi Wu Shuang. It was said that although the Lianqing family wasn't in the 4 great families, they were one of the most noble and most mysterious families in the Dragon War Empire. They were closely related to the Bailey family, and were of the same breadth and branch. Although they were few in number, every one of them were geniuses who knew how to make armaments. Among them, the eldest son of the Lianqing family, Jing Wushuang, was the most outstanding. When he was young, he was unanimously recognized as the successor of the Lianqing family. The Lianqing family's hereditary position was only based on ability, not seniority. To be able to become the patriarch, he must be able to command the fate of the entire family. Therefore, putting aside those armaments that he made, just based on the fact that he was able to obtain the approval of the Lianqing family, it wasn't hard to imagine that this man's ability was deep and immeasurable. Miss, where do you plan to go next? The man casually flipped through the ancient scroll in his hand. In the center of the carriage, there was still a teapot. Inside the teapot there was warm tea. Steam rose in spirals, emitting a faint fragrance. He faced Hellion Vivian and smiled. Although he was tired, it didn't affect his elegance in the slightest. It was as if an immortal had walked out from a painting. Wei Wei originally wanted to threaten this guy, and directly take her to the armament convention. In any case, he, Jing Wushuang, as the president's son, was also the highlight of this time's armament convention. He would certainly appear at the convention. But now, seeing that the man wasn't resisting and had even helped her so much, Hellion Vivian was too embarrassed to say her bellyful of vicious words. She could only say, "After we cross that mountain in front, put me down." The Black Wind horse's speed was very fast. In a short while, it spread its wings and flew over a mountain. After that, the man looked towards Hellion Vivian, who was sitting next to him, and lightly coughed twice. "Miss, shouldn't you get off the carriage? A single man and a single woman, don't ruin Mrs.'s reputation." Hellion Vivian also wasn't a thick-skinned person. She also more or less understood the other party's meaning. He was afraid that she would seize the opportunity to latch onto him. Ancient people were more complex than modern people thought. Not even 20 years old. Yet they thought that all the women in the world were close to him because they coveted something from him. Hellion Vivian smiled. Stretching her body, she casually threw 10 taels of silver on the table. This is a gift of thanks. Thank you, young Master Jing, for helping me smooth things over. Goodbye. She had just called him young Master Jing. Chapter 110. He, truly a smart girl. Jing Wuxuang raised her eyes. A light flashed through her usually warm eyes. Hellion Vivian had already jumped off the carriage. Suddenly having such a person come out of the carriage gave the servant driving the carriage a big fright. When Uncle Liang turned his head to look, he saw that the girl's complexion was fine. Her features were delicate and pretty, and her long black curly hair hung straight to her waist. She was so beautiful that people were reluctant to look away. He hurriedly tightened the reins, his old face filled with shock. Young master, just now. The person that the third prince was looking for, it couldn't be her, right? His master clearly knew, but still hid her in the carriage. If this was found out by the third prince. Uncle Liang wiped his cold sweat. Even if their family was large, they still had to give face to the imperial family. The young master really wasn't afraid of anything. However, this girl hid really well. The whole way here. He actually didn't detect anything strange at all. Uncle Liang. Jing Wuxuang's gentle voice interrupted his words. Her pair of clear eyes were as deep as the sea, suffused with a faint blue, as if she could drown a person. Then the corners of his mouth curved into a gentle arc. He extended his jade-like fingers and picked up the silver that Hellion Vivian threw on the table. How many people have you seen that the third prince couldn't find after searching for an entire day and night? Uncle Liang stared blankly. He had long heard of that prince's great reputation. Even if he lost his martial qi, no one dared to challenge his anger. No matter how arrogant the 4 great clans were, in front of him, even if they were unwilling, they still had to restrain their flames. One could imagine that prince's methods. Whatever he wanted to do, no one could stop him. Even the retired emperor was the same. Like today, searching for a person for an entire day with no results. 1. Uncle Liang flipped through his memories before answering. This old servant has only seen one. And the other person was even a girl. Jing Wuxuang put away the silver in her palm and smiled faintly. It seems that the Hellion family's trash isn't as useless as the rumors say. Just now, that was the Hellion family's good-for-nothing young lady? Uncle Liang suddenly opened his mouth wide. How is that possible? Didn't they all say that the eldest daughter of the Hellion family was tall and sturdy, with dark skin, and a debauchee vulgar manner that couldn't even compare to a village girl? That's why the heir of the Murong family couldn't help but break off the engagement. However, when he looked at that girl just now, even though it was only a glance, he saw the side of the other party's face. She was absolutely a beauty in the making. Jing Wuxuang put her hand to her lips and coughed twice. When she opened her mouth again, she said in an indifferent tone, "Nothing is impossible. Rumors in the marketplace are nothing more than idle gossip. Let's hurry up." Yes. It took Uncle Liang quite a while to come back to his senses. He raised his whip thoughtfully. Now that he thought about it, this was the first time the young master had taken the initiative to help someone. Could it be because that Hellion family's eldest daughter wasn't caught by third prince? Uncle Liang couldn't read his master's mind. At the same time, Eunuch's son couldn't figure out what His Highness was thinking. It had almost been 1 night and 2 days, but His Highness hadn't closed his eyes for a moment. Wasn't this kind of method too ruthless to himself? Those shadow guards outside had withdrawn, but it was very obvious that His Highness hadn't given up on the matter of capturing Miss Hellion. Just by looking at Elder Jizun's green face, one could understand the cause and effect. Humph! Don't count on me telling you the whereabouts of my dear disciple. Eunuch's son raised his head and looked at the ceiling. Oh my God, Elder Jizun had already repeated this sentence no less than 3 times. Yet Bailey Jiaju didn't even spare him a glance. He only leisurely drank his tea as his hand played with the top-notch armament components. These treasures could only be found in the Ghost Palace. It was enough to make all of the armament masters in the world itch for them. Elder Jizun licked his lips enviously and negotiated. I say, icy brat, why do you insist on looking for my dear disciple? She just didn't cooperate with your act. Do you need to be so ruthless? Beligaju didn't speak. He only propped up his chin and looked down at Elder Jizun, who was tied up into a ball. His gaze was colder than ever. If Fire Qilin didn't know that his current master couldn't see anything, he would have thought that his master was exerting pressure on Elder Jizun. Elder Jizun indeed felt the pressure, but for the sake of his dear disciple, he must hold on. Just as Elder Jizun planned to heroically sacrifice himself for his disciple, Beligaju's indifferent voice slowly transmitted over. Even if you don't say it, I will still find out where she went. Elder Jizun was stunned. What did this mean? Call Nangong lie over. Beligaju absent-mindedly asked the servant at the side. Elder Jizun blew his beard. It's over, it's over. The priest's divination was usually the most accurate under normal circumstances. Although Nangong Lai couldn't divine his disciple's specific location, he could predict north, south, east, west, and related events. When the time came, relying on this icy brat's brain, he would definitely quickly figure out where his dear disciple went. Shadow lowered his eyes and glanced at the slightly impatient Elder Jizun. After that, he said, Your Highness, I'm afraid the matter of finding Miss Hellion will have to be put aside for a while. The people from the 4 great clans have all arrived. Right now they're in the main hall. They want to ask Your Highness about some things that happened at White Academy. They came with ill intentions. They came with ill intentions. Elder Jizun stood up and was about to speak for Beligaju. Yet he saw that person carelessly brush the corner of his robe. His eyes didn't blink as he paced back and forth. A light breeze blew his long sleeves, rolling up traces of evil spirit. Fire Qilin shook his head. These humans were really stupid. They just had to pick a time when Master wasn't happy to come out and jump around. Bang! The wind rolled and the doors and windows closed. The precious marble reflected the luxurious palace hall. The clan leaders of the 4 great clans all wore incomparably pure and holy robes. Their whole bodies swelled with an unending stream of martial qi. Behind them stood each family's successor. Murong Changfeng was among them. His handsome face seemed to carry a never-before-seen sense of superiority. Every time the clan leaders of the 4 great clans came to the palace, they would inevitably put forward a lot of proposals. The emperor coveted beauty and easily listened to slander. The only thing to be thankful for was that the one who made the decisions in the palace wasn't him. Instead, it was the retired emperor. Since ancient times, White Academy has always been a place that pays the most attention to peace. How could they dispatch shadow guards there? This clearly violated the Academy's taboo. White Academy's taboo is to prohibit the use of privileges to harm students. His Highness didn't harm anyone. Fierce voices echoed under the dome. The dispute between the 2 sides was in full swing. The person in question, 3rd Prince Beligaju, was only sitting in his own seat. That mysterious and unfathomable face was turned sideways. His right hand was supporting his chin, absent-minded.